People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Great art demands a great audience, you know what I mean?
A veteran, isn't he?
Something like that.
I know what it does to some men.
I have to give that another try.
He's drunk.
What makes you say that?
The world lacks heroes, Rich.
I don't want to be one.
It's got nothing to do with you. You never wanted to be one.
Is there Richard Bone here? Crushed trachea, fractured skull, 17 years old. Cheerleader.
And I didn't do it. That's him.
You said it's him. Now, did I get that quote right?
Yeah, you got one big problem.
What's that?
Your imagination.
I haven't even begun to let my imagination loose on this one.
You're gonna blackmail J.J. Cord. Cronies in the playpen planning a dumb crime.
I do hope you weren't hurt.
He knew who you were from the first. You think we haven't been watched? He may be scared, but he's smart and powerful.
Mr. Cutter?
Richard Bone.
This young friend of yours is pursuing some fantasy of his own and includes me.
I didn't pick him out, you did. Whatever we do falls under the heading of justice.
Dishonorable and gutless.
Oh, you know a lot about guts.
Guts is hanging around in this pigsty month after month waiting for you to get the nerve to start living again. And what does it get me?
Cutter and Bone. Somewhere between heroes and villains.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Miss Maitland McDonagh.
It is always a pleasure to be here.
Also joining us is Mr. Mike Watt.
Hello.
Noirvember 2022 continues with a look at Ivan Passer's Cutter's Way. Originally released as Cutter and Bone, the film is an adaptation of Newton Thornburg's 1976 book and stars John Hurd as Cutter and Jeff Bridges as Bone. They're a pair of troubled souls who engage themselves in a mystery that may or may not be real. We will be spoiling that mystery and a lot more during our discussion, so if you don't want things ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you have seen this film. We will still be here. Maitland, when was the first time you saw Cutter's Way, and what did you think?
You know, the funny thing is, I don't remember exactly when I saw Cutter's Way, except that I must have seen it in a theater because I saw it at the time it was released, so clearly that was the only option. And I am pretty sure that I saw it under the title Cutter and Bone, because that is the way I always think of this film. I have it on DVD. The DVD is Cutter's Way, but it will always be Cutter and Bone to me. So I saw it in some theater in New York as Cutter and Bone before it was retitled.
Mike, how about yourself?
I saw it cut up on commercial TV, and I had a copy of the book lying around. I immediately read it and realized they were not the same animal.
No, definitely not the same animal. I have to say, I remember the posters for this one, but I don't remember the movie. I never saw the film until we started talking about this, and this was a big blind spot for me. This is one of those movies where it just feels like it was kind of custom made for me. It's a 1970s film, even though it was released in the early 80s. It has a Czech director with Ivan Passer. It's got an amazing cast to it, and it's kind of a paranoid thriller. So what's not to like?
And it's Jeff Bridges, too. That falls into his period where he was doing a number of these things. Winter Kills comes to mind whenever I think about this movie.
This kind of reminds me of Winter Kills meets The Big Lebowski a little bit.
The dude may have more ambition than Richard Bone.
Richard Bone is he's kind of a slacker in a big way, and we start with Bone. We don't start with Cutter, which is kind of odd. Though we start really the opening credit sequence, it's really kind of cool because it starts in black and white, and it's really going to call to the old days. We get a lot of mention of the old days. We have a lot of things that are hidden in the past. We start with this black and white footage of a parade. I guess it's the Founders Day parade, though we're going to get the parade later on in the film. And we've got a lot of women in period dress, and we have this amazing score by Jack Nitzsche. And this score by him, it really feels like it's a sequel to his score to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We've got a lot of the same musical instruments going on. We've got a singing saw. We've got a glass harp. He does this amazing thing where he takes mariachi music and he marries it with this more orchestral plus singing saw sound that he has going on. And that comes back at the end of the movie as well. And just kind of, he plays with that throughout the film. I think it's really clever the way that he's layering all these sounds on top of each other.
One of the things that I love about that black and white opening that then fades into the color is, first of all, it completely picks up on that extremely noir theme. And this is a totally noir film of the past never being dead. It's not even gone. It's not even past. And that's the thing that this movie is so about, that none of the sins of anybody's father are ever gone, and they are all visited on the current generation, and they're going to be visited on the generation after that. It's an incredibly fatalistic movie. And one of the reasons that I find it really hard to remember that this movie was released in the 80s is that it is such a 70s movie. And of course, that also plays into something that all of us, I'm sure, have said at one time or another, which is, well, decades don't change when you rip a page off the calendar and suddenly it's 1981 instead of 1980 or 1980 instead of 1970. That's not how those things work. Decades bleed into each other. And of course, again, that past, it's never dead. And it is certainly not gone in the first couple of years of any new decade.
Well, this whole thing with the Founders Day parade as well, it really reminds me of Ride the Pink Horse. And I'm surprised that this is taking place in Santa Barbara and not San Diego, and that you have things going on across the border, because this does feel very much like not only are things hidden in the past, but things are hidden in this other culture, even though we really just play with the other culture. That whole speech that Cutter gives about,
look, our glorious past, the mission of Santa Barbara. Happy Padres, happy Indians. The blessings of the white man. Wiped out in less than 200 years by disease, forced labor. You can still get one to clean up your kitchen there, or park your car. They died with Christ's blessing. Happy corpses, each and every one.
It's just the most cynical speech, even though Cutter is cynical through and through. And why not? The guy's a war veteran who lost a leg, part of his arm, and an eye, all in one of the most fruitless wars, one of the worst exercises that we've ever gone through in this country's history. Does that help that this is a 1970s film that's masquerading as a 1981 film? We've already started to address Vietnam in films. We've had Coming Home by now. We've had Apocalypse Now, but we have yet to get to that part where we're really much more rah-rah about Vietnam and more like, there were some good things that came out of this after all. No, this is super cynical because this really looks at it point blank and says, yeah, this was really stupid and look at how it's ruined this person's life.
That's actually one of the reasons I've always loved when people talk about Night of the Living Dead as being a Vietnam movie, because it is completely a Vietnam movie. And it is all about, first of all, the utter endlessness of it. The fact that it's just dragging on and on and on in the same way, frankly, that Vietnam has dragged through our culture, and it's still here. We're still all scarred by Vietnam. People who weren't alive during the Vietnam War, whether they know it or not, are still living the after effects of that war on this country. That hangs over Cutter and Bone so deeply.
Cutter represents the sort of the faceless rage. We got the crazy vets with Taxi Driver and Deer Hunter. We got the sad vets with Cutter's the angry, the working class guy, very much so. You don't know who he was before the war. He's very much defined by how he came home. He wears everything. He wears the entire horrors of the war. We see him, and it's so easy for everyone around him to dismiss him. Oh, that's Cutter, but they don't listen to what he says because what he says is so horrible, clear across the board.
Though he's very literate, and this film is very literate. We have Cutter as both Hamlet at one point. He's talking about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are there when he's talking about these two people that are at the bar with him. When we are first meeting he and Bone coming together, they're doing this whole routine about Moby Dick, this whole thing about how it sounds like a venereal disease, but Cutter is totally Captain Ahab, and he's just looking for a white whale. He needs that purpose, and that purpose comes to him in Cord, the villain of the piece, because Cutter really embodies Ahab. Ahab had a missing leg, his arm was fucked up, this whole thing. Like, he really fits into that physical mold of Ahab, plus he fits into that more megamaniacal mold of Ahab, where he's has to have a quest and he has to have this white whale in order to feel fulfilled. He's pretty aimless at the beginning, but once he latches on to this murder case that's happening, he suddenly has a purpose and really becomes much more focused.
Well, he literally has something to live for, because now his fury has an object. It's not that inchoate cloud that hangs over everything. Now it's been embodied in a specific person. And one of the things that I love about this movie is that for most of it, you really have no idea whether Cord is that bad. He's a rich dick for sure, because look, you don't get to be that rich without being a dick. I mean, that's a verity. It's entirely possible. I think pretty much throughout this movie that this really is all about one person's rage, not just at every bad thing that's happened to him, but just a rage at the fact that the universe is unfair and people get punished whether they deserve it or not. In fact, plenty of people who don't deserve anything wind up going under the steamroller, and plenty of bad people walk away untouched. In fact, often the better for the bad things they've done. Again, this is part of what is so 70s about this movie. The 70s were just a decade of unbelievable fury and mistrust and disillusionment and unhappiness at the way things were, at the entire structure of America. And yeah, Cutter and Bone absolutely shot through with it that there's almost not room for anything else.
And that's his contempt for Bone, too. Bone didn't deserve to get away with not going to war. They're the same age. It's implied that he's an Ivy Leaguer whose inertia just kept him exactly where he is. And in the book, he's even more shiftless. He's a monolith in the book of inertia. Their friendship relies on them being that opposite, because they hold each other in contempt, and they are each other's dark passenger, if you want to keep it a metaphor as far as you can. Cutter is everything Bone can't be, and Bone that Cutter never wants to be, but envies just as well. If that isn't too far, the psychology 101.
Yeah, the first time we meet Richard Bone, he has just Richard Boned Nina Van Pallant, who I think that's great casting because she was obviously one of my favorite 70s detective films, The Long Goodbye. And here she is, freshly fucked, but really not very satisfied when she gives the line about, here, take some money, go get some vitamin E. You're just like, wow, just the barbs that they're throwing at each other at this is fantastic. And I love when he talks about, are you still interested in this yacht? And she's like, yeah, I don't think I can talk my husband into it. I'm like, whoa, okay, all right. That he's basically a gigolo, and he's a gigolo with one of the worst cars ever. He's got this piece of shit vehicle that, he can't tip the, not that he was ever going to, but he can't tip the valet He needs to get a new transmission or whatever. And then it's his car dying that makes him the witness to this horrific crime that has just happened. Cars run through this whole movie too. You've got his car, you've got Cutter and his car. And when Cutter takes out the Toyota next to him, you've got the big Cadillac that's going to be showing up later on. I mean, cars and then other means of transportation, horses. I mean, when Bone is sitting there and his car won't turn over and that woman walks across the street goes across the street with the white horses, I'm like, oh, okay. And we get that line from Maureen the first time we meet her, Lisa Eichhorn, who is Cutter's wife. And she talks about how she's waiting for her hero on a white Charger. And then I love how at the very end, Alex Cutter is riding the white horse, even though by that time she's not with us any longer.
I'm always leery of that kind of symbolism, especially in American films. But then I take into account that Ivan Passer, with his Czech background and having a lot of symbolism there, I can see that sort of layering in. And the horse being a metaphor for a lot of things, for freedom, for Alex, for what few minutes he's on top of that thing. The idea that only the rich can have these animals that used to be plentiful. And Santa Barbara was known for cultivating horses, if memory recalls. So there's a lot of that sort of layering to go about.
And on top of that, it's a white horse. And of course, it's the pale rider comes in on the pale horse.
Yeah, you talked about the rule of threes, and we've got the trio of Bone, Cutter, and Moe. But then you get the other trio of Bone, Cutter, and George Swanson. And George ties Cutter and Bone together in a very interesting way that George's folks apparently passed away when he was young, and it was Alex Cutter's mom that ended up taking him in. And so he's kind of a brother to Cutter. And then he's also a pretty successful businessman running this whole yacht selling business and employs Bone as one of his employees. And Bone, again, very much a loser, basically lives on one of these boats that he's supposed to be selling. And he's doing it all with George knowing this. I don't think that he's pulling the wool over George's eyes at all. And George is just like, you need to take some responsibility with your life, even to the point where he gives him the keys to lock up. And he's just like, see, little step, just do this little thing and eventually you'll be more responsible. But Bone wants nothing to do with responsibility whatsoever. He doesn't even have the house. He's living on the boat. Like I said, when we see him go to his quote unquote home, eventually we realize, oh, this isn't his house. This is actually Cutter's house. And that's how we get introduced to Moe showing up and being like, basically not, what are you doing in my house? He's over there so often that he's basically a piece of furniture.
Well, in fact, what she says is, well, isn't it nice you have some place you can come when you don't have any place to go to? I mean, that's very sharp. And it's actually really nice because she's got a bottle of vodka in her hand and she has clearly been drinking. So obviously part of that scene is to set up the fact that she's a hard drinker, but she is not out of it in any way. And that's really important to establish early because otherwise she's very in danger of falling into that stereotype of, well, she drinks too much and that's why she puts up with her husband, who is massively difficult. And that's why she's okay with this weird floating housemate who comes in and leaves and, she's not having an affair with him, but it sure looks like there's an affair in the offing there and gives her husband more to rage about because he's a cripple. And the whole thing is incredibly efficiently drawn for you in the earliest sequences in the movie. A really complicated relationship, and yet you see what it is. You might not see why anybody's putting up with it because it's not a good relationship for any of them, but it's the relationship they've got. And they are in a place where none of them can see a way to change it or find the desire to look for a way to change it. And yet they're not lethargic characters. They're always out doing stuff, talking about things, thinking about things, even just going to that hokey parade thing. So it is really a fascinating balance of characters who, in another writer's hand and in another filmmaker's hands, could come off as people that you look at and say, why am I watching these people? They're self-destructive. They seem to be smart enough to see what they're doing wrong, and yet they keep on doing it over and over and over again. We've seen movies with characters like that where you get tired of them about halfway through and you feel as though, okay, if I'm being paid to see this movie, obviously I got to stick it out to the end. But otherwise, I'd like to walk. I'd like to be one of those people who walks out of a movie.
It could be interpreted as the most depressing codependent three-way ever to win. But they're imprisoned by their own demons. Bones' inertia, Cutter's rage, and Moe's just abject sadness at a situation she maybe didn't get herself into, but can't, as Maitland pointed out, can't get out of. Getting out means Alex being dead. One of them being dead.
And their dialogue back and forth, especially, I think everybody's dialogue in here is really great, but especially those barbs that Moe and Bone are trading. And then eventually when Cutter comes in, like what he's adding to the conversation, because we've already seen what a raconteur he is when he's at the bar the first time. I really just think this is so well written, and just that you do get to know these characters. I mean, we're maybe 20 minutes into the movie, and that we have such richly drawn characters already, and that you really feel that they have a history together and that they have this backstory. I mean, that's really pretty well done.
Going back with George, because that triggered something, George's relationship to everyone is revealed so late in the narrative. When you finally almost get to the point where you're suspicious of him, he reveals the childhood thing, and it connects the dots of Moe and Cutter and Bone to a degree as well, where you realize George is just as important of it. And he's trapped. He's trapped in his gratitude towards Cutter's family. He's trapped towards feeling this responsibility towards all three of them in a lot of cases. So it's a quartet now of unfortunate events.
Well, and then he's also in that weird position where he's got Cutter, who just really latches onto this idea that J.J. Cord has committed a murder, and then George works for Cord. So can you maybe cool it talking about my boss, especially talking very, very loud in this very posh place right around Cord's wife? That would be really good, Cutter, if you could knock that off, because you're putting him in a very awkward position. And he's there skirting that line between the haves and the have-nots. And to your point, he's very, very nice to everybody all the time. One of the first times we see him, I think, is when he's driving Alex home and, has him leaning on him and walking the 13 steps up to the house. It's just, he's constantly being the nicest guy in the world.
For a 70s movie, that is a very interesting character, because 70s movies were generally not very kind to the rich, not very kind to people really with any kind of privilege. And that was a decade where the underdog really ruled in serious films of any kind, whether they were independent films or low budget films or big budget movies, generally speaking, unless you were looking at, some Murder on the Orient Express kind of movie, which was all a big fantasy with a lot of rich people on a train and didn't really have any reflection, any connection to any kind of reality. But movies that were supposed to be set in any kind of real world had this kind of disconnect and difficulty and this awful sense of where everybody is meeting everybody else and who's not on equal ground. It was a thing it was very hard to get away from in any serious 1970s movie, which again is really what Cutter and Bone is.
And you do see that later on in the film, Bone, he's getting ready for one of the polo matches, and he's even got the funny pants on and stuff. Not as funny as George's, but it's okay, he can truck in that world. He can walk in and out of the El Encanto and nobody's going to blink an eye. He can live in that world of the rich. He's got Jeff Bridges looks fantastic in this movie. He's super ripped, and he's got the great tan and the mustache and everything. He can go into that world, but he can't stay there. He doesn't have the gumption to stay there. I think he's much more comfortable in Cutter's world, even though he and Cutter get along like oil and water a lot of times.
There's no responsibility in Cutter's world. Bone flees. He walks away. Any kind of responsibility, social, economic, grammatic, he's walking away from it.
And then when Cutter tries to put responsibility onto Bone and starts to connect these dots as far as like, oh, hey, he eventually gets arrested or picked up and taken to the cops, into headquarters to talk about, this body that had been found right near where his car broke down. And Cutter's just latches onto that and starts to play detective and starts to put together all of this quote unquote evidence, reading things in the paper and like, well, didn't you say you were here at midnight and where was this person at midnight, and going around about that. And we get to meet the sister of the dead girl, Valerie Duran, and she starts to latch onto this stuff as well. And Bone wants nothing to do with this and starts to call all of this stuff crazy, which the first time I watched this movie, I was right there with him. I was yelling at the TV going, what are you doing? Why do you think this is a conspiracy? Why do you think that it is this Cord character? Because Cutter thinks that he sees him at this parade, and then Alex just immediately gloms onto that as like, it's Cord. It's got to be Cord. And he just immediately, he knows that is the killer. And I'm like, what is going on? How do you know that this is the killer? But the whole movie has to move that way. He has to think that this is the killer and start to forge this whole case against him. It's, in most paranoid thrillers, you're afraid that everybody's going to get you. But in something like this, you're paranoid and you just latch onto the one rich guy, and think that he's the one that is pulling all the strings. Suddenly he becomes this mastermind and they don't even know this guy.
Cord was busy last night. Car was burned at the marina.
What was he doing at the marina?
Paper says he was at the oil conference at the Al Canto. Decided to go for a drive. He says he does it all the time.
That's where I saw him.
What?
I saw him at the El Encanto. I was there last night. I saw him at the parade, and I made the connection.
What time did you say you left the El Encanto?
12. A little after 12.
No kidding. That's funny because it says here in the paper this guy was driving around midnight, went down to the yacht club or something to look at his boat, and kaplooey, somebody just happened to blow up his car. What size car did you say you saw?
Wait a minute. Didn't say anything about blowing the car up. The car was burned. It's a fiesta, There's bars trashed all the time. Cars are blown up all the time.
Girls get killed all the time. What kind of car did you say you saw?
Big car.
Like a Cadillac, maybe?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm sorry, man. You're right as rain as usual. The odds against old J.J. Cord being a trash can killer absolutely out of the question. Except for one thing, Rich. Two things, in fact. First of all, you said it's him. Now, did I get that quote right? Not similar, sort of, kind of looks like him a little bit. You said it's him. And second, big number two, Rich. His car takes it in the shorts within 90 minutes of when the girl's body is found. And you don't find that even remotely intriguing?
Yeah, you got one big problem.
What's that?
Your imagination.
This is facts, Rich. I haven't even begun to let my imagination loose on this one.
This truly is the greatest Jim Thompson story that Jim Thompson never wrote, because that is exactly what its dynamic is. It is entirely built on something that is rooted in class and money and social status. It's poisonous at the root. So, of course, everything that grows up from it is poison. The trunk is poisoned, the leaves are poisoned, the fruit is poisoned. The whole thing is poisoned because of this incredibly toxic class issue. And let's face it, in America, class is about money. This is in England, where there are more subtle nuances of how poisonous class can be. But in America, it truly is money. The old aristocracy in America is what? 200 some, it's just not that old. You know that it is all built on illusions.
Let's take the metaphor out for a second. We'll take the whole memory out of it for a second. And let's think, I think everything that eventually happens to the three characters is inevitable. Whether this mystery had happened or not, I feel like they were all on this downward tragedy before Bone's car had broken down. And I think that they were just one empty bottle away from all of this tragedy happening one way or another. So the cord is just the distraction for the death wish, for this mutual death wish that the three of them seem to have.
Cutter gets so distracted so quickly by the Ann Dusenberry character who shows up and suddenly is hardcore flirting with her. That whole scene in the car when they send Bone in with this note, this really bad idea of a note, and then he's out in the car pretty much starting to undress her and flirting hardcore with her. And I don't know if they ever actually hook up or not, but it sure feels like he just starts to push Mo more towards Bone to be like, here, help ease my mind by you sleeping with my wife so I can then sleep with this Valerie character, because this is what I really want.
I feel like Valerie's disposable. 4 minutes later, she's not in the movie.
We'll talk about that, yeah. But yes, she is very disposable.
I think he was driving Mo away to get her away from him so he could finally drink himself to death. If there's any kindness in him at all, whether, I don't think he wanted to take her with him, but that's sure the way she wanted to go.
What do you guys think of the whole scene with the Toyota? That scene takes up a lot of time in this movie, so I feel like it has to be more important than just showing Cutter destroying some guy's car. It feels like there has to be more to that.
I'm not really sure what it is, because it seems like a very big scene to simply show that, oh, by the way, he can turn on the normal when he needs to. He can turn on the normal, and he can play the I'm a veteran card when the cops come in. And clearly he has done what these people said he did. But he seems entirely reasonable. And hey, the guy's a veteran. He's a wounded veteran. Even if you don't know that he's got a fake leg, you can see that the guy is physically damaged. And yet he is thoroughly coherent, thoroughly polite. It feels as though this is a neighborly thing that has just gotten out of hand. And it's clearly that other couple who are the problem, which I'm sure anybody else who lives on that block or that circle or whatever, that the exact construction of that area is, could tell you that, no, actually, those people aren't the problem. We may not like them, but they're not the problem. The big problem is that house there, the house of Alkies, that is the magnet for trouble here. And those are the difficult people. So I think that it's a big part of what that scene is for. It's to show that there is a reason that he hasn't been hauled off and put into some institution for his own good, to show how much he's got. It's not the mask of sanity that he's got on, but he's got a mask of normalcy that he can put on when it's useful to him, which of course I suppose is the definition of a sociopath, isn't it? So, and yet I don't think that we're supposed to see him as a sociopath in the horror movie kind of way. He's not Michael Myers is an inhuman thing, but some other super villain in a bunch of monster movies. It is the mask of sanity that we're looking at, to go back to old Frederick Wertham and his largely crackpot thinking, but he did give us that term.
It shows that Cutter can also harness the power of thank you for your service. The cops want nothing to do with the situation. Who's right, who's wrong? They want out of the situation right now. And that's the hypocrisy surrounding him that I think that's, if the scene has any deeper meaning, it's that I can exploit this shit too. And he exploits that situation constantly. That's the weak reason he gets away with shooting off guns at the pier and mouthing off in front of Cord's wife. That gets him out of trouble, which Bone can't, but he could fit into Bone's skin very easily and pass himself off as Richard for the day.
Yeah, I like how he peppers those little things in there by like, well, I know all about duty and all those, the little things that he's talking about to the cop. And then the neighbor starting to swear and rant and rave when the cop isn't hauling Cutter away. I love that, because the cop then has to turn on that guy, the guy who's actually in the right, the guy who's just got his car smashed up by this drunkard, but yet he's now getting chastised by this cop. I love the way that they turn that scene around so quickly.
And you could probably layer meaning into that as well. The complacency of the people who didn't go. If you want the deeper meaning for that scene, but I think it really comes down to Cutter is in charge. I think he's a lunatic, so maybe that gives the mystery more credence around you. Maybe it's just service for the audience.
There are times in this movie where I get a real slobs versus snobs type of vibe to this as well, like when they're in that restaurant. I'm reminded of the Blues Brothers at Chez Paul, or when Axel Foley goes to encounter Victor Maitland at the very ritzy lunch that he's doing. It just, this whole thing of them infiltrating this world. And there are times, like, you said, he can pull off the normal when he puts on the suit coat and is at the posh party later on. He kind of looks like he belongs there. Other than the eye patch, he looks like just another dude walking around in this party. And then when it gets really upset and then he has to hop around, he has to use the leg. And my God, John Hurd's physical acting in this movie and the way that they cheat the leg and cheat the arm and everything, I thought they did a really good job with this. I was very surprised when he, is getting his pants taken off and it's a whole prosthetic leg, or at least it looks like it. I was really impressed because this is obviously 25, 30 years before Captain Dan doesn't have one of his legs in Forrest Gump, or both of his legs in Forrest Gump. This is, more primitive technology, and we're cheating that this guy has no arm and no leg.
8 years after we spun an 8-year-old girl's head around. So,
Absolutely. But to be fair, far more effectively in this film. I mean, I love The Exorcist as much as anybody, but you look at it now and the effects are clearly effects of a time, but there was never a moment in this movie where I was looking at it and thinking, oh, well, that's an effect there.
No, but I feel like there are many times where I'm watching going, that's not John Hurd either.
For sure. When he's on that horse, it's definitely not John Hurd. Yeah.
You haven't gotten John Hurd since Cutter's Way. He's the closest he gets is his temper tantrum and Big, I think. Otherwise, you get very middle of the road John Hurd since this movie. Got all of his Cutter out in this film, and he needed to retire to softer tones, I think.
Well, for a lot of years, because he is wearing the eye patch and the hat and just the way he's holding his face, I didn't know that it was John Hurd on the box when I would pass this at Blockbuster, or on the poster when I saw it at the theater. If anything, I thought he looked a little bit more like John Savage than John Hurd. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever this is. And I would say the same thing about Jeff Bridges. I'm not used to this type of Jeff Bridges, just him looking more like he's going to look in Against All Odds, like this more male model look of Jeff Bridges, because he's a handsome man, but I don't think of him as being that handsome very often, but occasionally he would do that in his roles. And this is one of them where he looks like he belongs on the front cover of one of these yachting magazines that he holds up to Nina Van Pallant.
And I get the feeling he was probably very careful about that throughout his career, because clearly he was somebody who wanted to be a serious actor. And he was actually lumbered with looks that I think probably made it more difficult for him than it might have been otherwise, because he was extraordinarily handsome when he was young. And he was perfect American movie handsome. He was Tab Hunter handsome. And being Tab Hunter handsome is not generally the ticket to really good roles. It's the ticket to being that really pretty lifeguard, or, that cute boy cruising in his convertible. And I think Bridges didn't want to be that guy. He really did want to be a serious actor, and succeeded. And here's a movie where he had to embrace those looks and yet still give that character a real depth that can easily get lost under the golden California boy exterior.
Yeah, I know he had worked with his dad and that he's, a legacy that, the Bridges have been around, but it does feel like he's got the goods. Like from those earliest roles, it feels like he was working at his craft. And now you look at him and you're just like, yeah, he is now like up on the Mount Rushmore of actors as far as just like, oh yeah, this guy, he knows what he's doing, everything that he's in. If the movie's not good, at least he's really good. It's tough for me to say like, oh, that was a bad Jeff Bridges performance, because I don't think that he gives bad performances very often, if at all, other than maybe Tron Legacy.
He's more comfortable when he's the goofy hero, like in Hearts of the West, or even in Winter Kills, where he's completely in over his head, even though, that's the world he embodies. I like in over his head Jeff Bridges, and I don't think being that handsome did him any, it hurt him at all. I think it was funny that they really wanted him cast in this film on the strength of how Heaven's Gate was doing in dailies. If we want to look back and laugh at history there, that's an amusing anecdote in and of itself.
Except that I'm the person who will jump up and say Heaven's Gate is a great movie.
100%. But in 1981, you weren't allowed to mention it in public.
It's true. It was the albatross around your neck then. But the thing is, I don't think it's ever been fully rehabilitated. I think that maybe just because too many people haven't seen it, because it's really long. And, it's still trailing that poisonous miasma that got wrapped around it for all of those reasons that really didn't have a lot to do with what was on the screen, but a lot to do with the coverage around the making of it. So
we're also talking about they were so intent in getting him that even after Jeff Bridges' dog attacked them, they really knew that Richard Bone. I love that story.
Yeah, Goofy Bridges is where I prefer him a lot of times. So like Thunderbolt and Lightfoot Jeff Bridges, or King Kong Jeff Bridges. After this, even Starman, I would say is pretty goofy, but in a great way. And that's another one where he can be really handsome, and there are times where he looks really handsome, and then others where I'm just like, oh, he's being a goofball. And I enjoy that. I enjoy when he's the goofball in this, but there's not a lot of humor in this movie. I find myself laughing quite a bit, but it doesn't feel like they're setting up for comedy stuff. It's just more of that interaction between our main characters where you can sense, even though they are, like I said before, oil and water, there is this sense that these guys have been around each other for so long and that they can give each other shit like crazy. Like at one point when Cutter starts to complain about something and Bone's just like, oh, the leg. Tell me about the leg again. He just keeps going on, just really ripping into Cutter being a veteran and having this injury and relying on that to get people to not beat him up or maybe pay for a drink or not kick him out of a bar after he destroys one of the signs. He gets a lot of leeway because of his veteran status.
I also like that they've been friends for so long that Bone can undercut the Moby Dick like 3 minutes into the film. He's venereal disease joke, and the look on Cutter's face, because it's clearly he's been in charge until Bone showed up, and then suddenly he's on uneasy footing and he starts getting. And it's their dynamic is drawn in the first couple of minutes.
Basically, when he shows up and starts to undercut Cutter's position there, I think that's when Cutter decides, oh, let me throw you to these black guys who are here, and start throwing out the N-bomb all over the place. I'm like, oh man. And luckily he manages to defuse that situation, because otherwise it looked like he was going to let Bone get the shit kicked out of him.
From the narrative point of view, you really want the audience to connect with your main character. You really want them on board. So let's see, how racist and horrible can I get the title character to see if you're going to be on board for the next 87 minutes?
Well, yeah, nobody's really coming off as very good. Even the sister, even Valerie, like at one point when they're talking about doing this, and I love when Mo calls it a dumb crime, when they're getting ready to do this dumb crime, she's like, what, your sister's been in the ground for 2 days? Just like maybe be more concerned about mourning than trying to get revenge or trying to make money, because really at the heart of this, it feels like a heist gone wrong. It's a blackmail plot gone wrong, but this whole like, oh, we're going to have him give us the money, and by us getting the money, we're going to be able to go to the cops then and say, look, he gave us this money. That must mean he's guilty. It's like, yeah, are you really going to do that? Or are you just going to take the money and run? I mean, looking at their situations, I would say that they're pretty much going to take the money and run. They're not doing anybody any favors with this.
And frankly, even if they were going to take the money to the police, that's not proof of anything. I don't have to be a member of the police department to say that if somebody came in and said, hi, I have this money that we got out of this guy through blackmail, and that proves that he committed this crime. What do you say to that? You say, well, no, actually, that doesn't prove anything. Do you have a tape recording of him saying, I'm giving you this money because, God damn it, you have the evidence that I committed this crime, which I'm now going to go and burn up in my fireplace so it won't be there, just in case you are that dumb. But it's fascinating. And in a movie that were less perfectly grounded by the characters and by the performances that the actors playing them give them, that's the kind of thing that would stop you dead when you were watching it. It's just stupid, and I'm not going with it. And yet it doesn't stop you dead. And so you see it play out, and then it's fine.
Just from a narrative standpoint, Valerie almost infuriates me. And I always feel like, did I missed part of the movie? Like, did Tubi put a commercial in and I didn't notice or something? She is so inconsequential. She's merely there to fuel Cutter's narrative throughway because she's so ineptly drawn and with everything else fitting into place, not necessarily neatly, but at least in a way that you can understand that she feels like the only misstep for me. And like I said, she just stops being in the movie after the plot fizzles out. It's the only misstep I really feel that the movie's in. But at the same time, it's like you say, the plot doesn't make any sense. And whether Cutter's mind makes any sense or not, I think is beside the point. He wants his vengeance one way or another. But she feels like an instrument of that. Like he created her somehow. If she hadn't shown up before we met, before we understood the situation with Cutter, I would feel like he hired her somewhere along the line.
Talking about Cutter and Cutter's fantasy world, there are at least 2 times where we enter fully into his fantasy world when he's at the posh restaurant and he starts to give this whole scenario about the dead sister, about the victim, and how she was being picked up by Cord, who likes to pick up hitchhikers. And then he just starts to go into like what the dialogue was like, which is really strange. And then he does that same thing again later on when he sends Bone in with that note that he's out in the car with the sister now and fantasizing about what's going on inside of the building and how Bone has to move from one person to the next as he's trying to get up the ladder to Cord in order to hand him this note. And here we are in his fantasy, just him explaining everything that's going on, doing the voices, doing the dialogue. And then her now, as part of his fantasy, starts to interact with him as these characters he's making up, like Miss Ironcrotch and stuff. And it's like, okay, he's very good at drawing people in. That's his superpower. But I just appreciate how we are with him so much. And like you said, he's a tough protagonist to like. We're with him so much, though, that he can just explain what had happened or what might be happening at the moment. And we're supposed to take that as pretty much gospel.
Right. We're supposed to go along with his fantasy as well because he's talking to us. He's a fantasy girl and his fantasy audience.
Quite honestly, you do continue to go with it, even as you're sitting there and thinking, this is actually ridiculous. It's incredibly convoluted. It's not truly making any sense. And the way in which certain scenes are shot also undermine all of that. I find the scene where he goes into that enormous building and walks right past the security guard kind of baffling. I mean, I remember in the 70s, security was not what security is now. You didn't have metal detectors in office buildings or anything like that then. But there is something not right about that sequence. And I think that it's because you really are being shown, you're being pulled into somebody else's delusion. And I like that the moment that then snaps you out of it is the shooting of that game prize, that stuffed creature, that gets thrown in the water. Yeah, murdering whatever that toy's name would be is a real corrective to the fantasy seeming things that happen there, because that just pulls you right back to, that's a crazy reaction. That is a reaction of somebody who really has begun to be consumed by thoughts that are not necessarily rational.
He goes out, he lies, gets Cutter so excited that he starts singing You're a Grand Old Flag, eventually says, no, I lied. This didn't actually happen. I didn't actually give him the note. I'm like, wow, I'm surprised that you didn't try to keep that going for a little while longer. And it gets Cutter, even more incensed that he kind of disappears for a little while from the film and is out doing his own investigations some more, because he's already been doing investigations. He's even lied to people and says that he's from a magazine just to try to get more information out of people. I mean, he's really a great amateur detective. And I think, Bridges, kind of like Jeff Lebowski, he's just along for the ride. He can't figure anything out. He's just, having all this stuff heaped upon him.
I think he's also the guy who's had a better upbringing somehow. His upbringing was not quite as rough. And so, this kind of deceit does not come naturally to him. And this kind of belief in this monumental conspiracy does not come so easily to him. He can absolutely believe that there are bad guys who do really, really bad things. But that it could be something so monumental, I think, is harder for him to grasp, because his life has just not been that rough. He's not the guy who's literally half the man he used to be. Well, maybe not quite literally, but he is literally less of a complete person than he used to be. That's something that hasn't happened to both of them. It's only happened to one of them.
Bone can't even recognize his place in the world, how lucky he is. And it is the luck of privilege, of being that beautiful, being, whether he's wealthy or getting into the good school or whatever kept him out of the war. He's completely indifferent to the fact that he could very, very easily have ended up like Alex, which Alex recognizes and Mo recognizes, and they resent the shit out of him for it. And it's just part of his inertia, his refusal to take any responsibility. In fact, lying about giving the letter is more work than just having turned the letter over in the first place. But it avoids his culpability.
Most interesting part of this movie for me is when Bone manages to talk Mo into having sex with him. And I can't tell when they're having sex if she's laughing, crying. It kind of feels like a little bit of both put together, but I would say more on the crying side. It's just one of the saddest scenes. And then when she asks him not to leave and he promises that he'll stay, and then as soon as she closes her eyes, he's out the door. It's that line from Cutter earlier, there goes Richard Bone doing what he does best, walking away. And that he has to get out of there, even though he's made her all these promises, basically like, I won't lose a friend if we sleep together. It'll only bring us closer together, like doing all of the lines. And as soon as she's out, he's out the door, and then her eyes are open and realizes just what a shit he is, or has it confirmed again.
He's her confirmation that there's no kindness left in her world. So whatever happens next, for whatever reason it happens, I feel is inevitable. Mo's out at that point. It's even sadder in the book because she and have a child together. I think you've even said it's like Peter denying Christ. Bone is just telling her, I'm no more the man than Alex is for you, and we're both bad for you, and there's no, but those are your only choices. It's me or him. It's an immensely sad scene. I never saw her laughing. I'm so uncomfortable with that scene every time it comes on. Because I just see the despair pouring out like Frank Zappa's slime from my video. It's just over the screen of just sadness and utter despair. I can't think of a better word for it.
Yeah, and then the back and forth that Cutter and Bone have over her death. And of course, Cutter has to start to bring it back into the conspiracy, that, they were going after you. You're the witness. Your picture was in the paper. They wanted to kill you. And that was him sending us a message. Like you said, he was going to send us a message. And to go from that. And then when Bone is like, she was really depressed the last time I saw her. And Cutter just going off about what an ego that Bone has. And, how dare you even imply that by you leaving, she was sad enough to kill herself and burn the whole house down. I love all of that stuff, all of that back and forth. Just these two actors going at it in these scenes. It's so powerful.
And even at the time, Bowen is saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying she killed herself because of me. It wasn't my fault. She was just sad. It was nothing that I did at all. He gets angrier as he tries to weasel out of this conversation. But at the same time, he needs Cutter to believe that Mo killed herself, but not because of me.
Can't pin anything on me, thanks.
And yes, that is that golden boy privilege. I'm not sure that he ever articulates it to himself, but he does believe, I think, on some level that, well, he is so good looking and he went to an Ivy and he is so well spoken that no matter what shitty thing he does and what shit it brings into his life, that it will all wash off him in the end and he'll still be the golden boy. And again, that's a very tough thing to pull off and not make you absolutely hate him. Because although he has done despicable things, it's tough to hate him.
Which is perfect casting. You even said it. Can you think of a bad Jeff Bridges film? And you had to go all the way to Tron Legacy, which is just booing the Special Olympics as far as I'm concerned there, Michael. But I don't think this movie would have worked. Somebody said he doesn't have the Pacino look. Well, you would have easily hated Pacino through this. At the same token, I don't think Richard Dreyfuss would have been a good Alex Cutter either, mainly because I think his voice is funny. But I think the brilliance of the casting, as we've been saying, is they were perfect. Bridges was perfect for the superficiality of it, and John Hurd was perfect for, who knew John Hurd had that in him. To diss him, but seriously, that was a once in a lifetime. He's never done that again.
After Mo is gone, so his house is gone, and George comes in, steps in like a hero again, and says, you can stay at my guest house and stay there.
He's practically barricaded himself in my guest house. Won't come out, won't let me in. I don't know what he does for food.
It's not a conspiracy wall, it's not full Pepe Sylvia type of thing, but it's getting close. He's got some stuff up on the wall in the background, but then what you really see is the pool table with all of the documents that he's collected. And that's kind of more of a conspiracy pool table. Like, I didn't see any red string, but I wouldn't put it past him to lay that down to connect all these dots. And that's really where he has gone full bore. Mo was definitely a victim and just starts to really tie all of these things together.
I look at that in another way too. That's the alcoholics pool table too. In a lot of ways, that's his grief, and he takes the grief straight, as he says. So he's sober when he's doing this, but that's another kind of addiction. I guess he's losing himself in all of this stuff to justify. He lost his wife. It was inevitable, and he knew this was coming, but he always thought, I guess, that he would be responsible for it. I'm not sure, but the rage is right there. And then the dog comes in and just messes everything up later.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with a quartet of interviews. First up, you'll hear from screenwriter Jeffrey Alan Fiskin. After that, we'll hear from George Swanson himself, Arthur Rosenberg. After that, we'll hear from Ann Dusenberry. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Lisa Eichhorn. And we'll be back with all of those right after these brief messages.
Hi there, faithful Projection Booth listener, Chris Stashew here. If you're looking for even more deep dive film discussion, both old and new, on and off the cinematic beaten path, check out the Culture Cast. Every episode I'm joined by a different guest as we traverse the cinema landscape talking about not only our monthly theme, but also some of the year's biggest films. I'm even joined by the host of the Projection Booth, the one and only Mike White. So if you want to listen to even more conversations on film, head on over to culturecast.com or find it on all podcatchers, both Android and iOS.
Welcome to the interview portion of the show. First up, we're going to hear from screenwriter Jeffrey Alan Fiskin. I would love to hear more about you and your story and kind of how you got involved in screenwriting.
When I was about 9 years old, the kid next door, his name is Jimmy Seltzer, we were playing outside, and he had a new Army helmet. This was about 1950, 51. So there was leftover stuff from World War II. Pretty common. But I didn't have one. And Jimmy was not about to share it with me. this was his new helmet. But I did know where he kept the damn thing. There was a big box of toys and costumes and stuff out by the garage. So we finished playing. Jimmy goes into the house, and I sneak into the box and grab the helmet and run from my house. And I'm marching around the house, winning wars and so forth. And my mom sees it. She doesn't say anything. She just notes it. And is clearly, now I realize that I'm going to let his dad take care of this. And my dad came in and he said, nice chapeau. And I said, but what about my helmet? And he said, yeah, I was noticing that. Where did you get that? And I realized almost immediately that I was in deep trouble and didn't dare say I stole it from Jimmy Seltzer. So I made up a story. And he picked me up under his arm. I'd been there before. And we headed off to the bedroom. And he said, it's too bad that you're not a writer. I said, why is that? He said, because if you were a writer, you'd get paid for telling lies like that instead of getting a spanking. Now, my mom has assured me that I never did get a real spanking, that by the time he said the word spanking, I was howling so mightily that he never could hit me. But I said, how much? He said, oh, maybe as much as your allowance, which is probably 25 cents a week. Well, that seemed to me like a pretty good idea, and it stuck in my mind. Now, it is possible that by the time I was lying, I was already a writer, and that there was nothing further to be done with me except shove me out the front door and say, see if you can do it. That was the first thing. The second moment, and perhaps closer to what you were thinking about, I was up in Berkeley. I was getting my master's, my MFA, studying with Mark Rothko. And when I came down, I got married. And on my wedding night, my oldest friend, named Charlie Plotkin, staggered into the room and pounded at the door about 2 a.m. And when I opened it, he came in with a big box, put it down on the floor, and said, you remember, this is through a drunken slur, of course, you remember how every time we go to the movies, you say you could do better than that? Well, go ahead. And then he grabbed a bottle of champagne and went out. That was it. I opened the box. I had no idea what it was. And it was an old Bolex Rackover model camera. When I went back up to Berkeley, I started making films which were intended for the cinema psychedelica, and they were terrible. But when I came down with my master's degree, I was supposed to start teaching drawing, sort of classical French style drawing at Chenard, which became CalArts. And I thought, I don't really want to do this. I had just been to a show, Pasadena Museum, which is run by the art professor at Pomona College, a guy named Jim Demetrian. And there was a show, and I saw it, and it was by a friend of mine, a very good friend, and I hadn't seen his work before, and I saw the show, and I looked at it, and I thought, uh-oh, this is really art. I can't do this. It was James Turrell now, Jim then. And it was his first show, but it was so obvious that this was genius at work that I lost all interest. Now, I still draw. I love to draw. But I knew that I could not match that. At the same time I came back, my cousin in the family, a guy named Richard Tufeld, who was the voice of the robot in Lost in Space. He's the origin of Danger, Will Robinson. And he was, as the hippest member of the family, find out what cousin Jeffrey's going to do with his fancy $10,000 education. And we had lunch, and I said, well, I'd like to make movies. And he says, okay, we'll have a meeting with your agent next week. Keep it free. I'll let you know which day. And I went and I met a wonderful agent named Stu Robinson, and he clearly owed Richard a favor, a big one. He said, well, have you written anything? And I proudly gave him a poem cycle and a third runner-up short story in some magazine contest. And he looked him over and he just said, I don't think that David Merrick's going to be knocking down my door to get to these. Is there a show on TV you like? And I said, well, I don't watch too much, but yeah, I kind of like the Bill Cosby and Robert Culp show, I Spy. And he said, why don't you write one? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it's going to be about 50 pages, and you know what it looks like. Just write it. So I went home and I wrote it. And he read it and he said, you know, this is really pretty good. But in the 2 months since you started this, the show's been canceled. He says, but we have a sample. So is there another show that you like? And I said, well, I kind of like Mission Impossible. And he says, how about you write an outline for Mission Impossible? You don't have to write the whole script. I can prove that you can do that. So I did, and he says, this is good. And I go to see whoever was the showrunner at the time. The story was the great Russian cellist Mordecai Shelyovich is defecting to the West. He gets away with this wonderful, impossible, but he realizes when he gets here, he can't go on without his cello. And so I'm in a meeting. He says, you know, this is really, it's well written. He says, but I'm not sending my crew out for a fucking cello. And I said, you know, they get out okay. He says, no, you don't understand. Well, I didn't have to, because I think they were canceled within not too long after that. They thought that franchise was in. And I thought, you know what? I could actually blackmail people threatening to write something for them, and the show, you know, and if they don't pay me, the show will be canceled because I'll write something for free. So anyway, those are my opening salvos in the game. And then I went to work as a reader for Sandy Howard, serious producer back in those days, like for A Man Called Horse with Richard Harris. That was his franchise, and there were some others. So I'm a reader, and he's a smart guy. And he puts us a test. He gives me a stack of scripts. He says, read these, tell me what you think. And there's one script in there he's interested in because it's just finished shooting, and no one's seen it, but he wants to see what I'll do with it. And that was A Man Called Horse. And my response was, you know, it's good, but isn't there anything that Richard, this character, not Richard Harris, the horse, can bring to the Indians? I like that he learns everything, all of their wisdom. And now, in retrospect, it sounds like I'm saying blue lives matter too. But that isn't what it felt like at the time. It seemed like a reasoned, slightly monarchical position. So, and he said, well, I don't think you can be a reader, but you still can write. So what if we develop a film together? And we developed a film called Loose Change about soldiers coming back from Vietnam. And I wrote it. And he said, this is good, but you need to change the hero into more of not this dark, brooding guy, but someone who lifts himself up by his own bootstraps. Well, I assured Mr. Howard that despite all of his wisdom, no, we are not making that change. In fact, we're not going to make any changes. And he said, you do realize that we're equal partners on this. You can't do anything with the script without me. And I said, well, that must mean that you can't do anything without me. And he had paid me like $1,500 to write the script. Which had been all the money in the world, I thought. I finally said, I'll pay you back what you paid me. And he said, no, you've got to pay me that plus what I put in. So I managed to hustle up $3,000. And for the first serious job in the movie business, I was $3,000 in the hole and had what may well have been an unmakeable script. But my agent said, well, let's see. You only need one person ever to like it. And about 3 days later, it was optioned by Harold Hecht of Hecht Hill Lancaster. All of Burt Lancaster's films with Harold. He was a lovely old guy. And sadly, he had a heart attack or some damn thing and really never got around to that script. But I had a profit from the option and been at it ever since.
Did you work on a film called Angel Unchained?
Oh, I did. That was my first movie. That came about. My agent called Stu Robinson again and said, I set up a meeting with a guy named Sam Arkoff. He's over at American International Pictures. You should meet with him because they make low-budget, independent things with unknowns all the time. And I said, well, I don't have anything on my, have any ideas. He said, you don't have to. That's not how the meetings work. The first meeting is, hello, how are you? And then you wait and let him tell you what he wants. And you say, let me work on that for a few days. You go home, you figure out exactly how to do what he wants, you go back in, you got a job. Well, I arrived and I thought, okay, I can do that. I go to the meeting. Sam is standing behind his desk. He had a stogie, and I think he lived that way, just standing up. He did not say, hello, how are you? Come and sit down. As I came in the door, he said, so what's your idea? And I was stymied. I think I was looking for a place, a rock to crawl under. But what my eye hit on was the overnights on the Variety second page, which was open and said, Mag 7 clicks for 7. That is, ABC showed The Magnificent Seven, and it did well. And I said, biker movie based on The Magnificent Seven. You have to have a guy who goes around and collects all these outlaws to fight something. Not sure what yet. And he looked at me and he said, go home, write it. I'll make a deal with your agent this afternoon. And that was it. Within a very short time, because I wasn't about to wait around any longer for things to be canceled, I had a script. They hired Lee Madden, is his name, Lee Madden Sr., his dad, Lee Madden's dad. He was a commercial director in Michigan, I think, because I think he did car commercials, but he certainly was an ad director for TV ads. And this was his directorial, as he moved up, the Ridley Scott movie. And then they decided to pack it with, and I don't know how this came about, but Tyne Daly was in it, the daughter of John Daly, big TV star. A friend of mine from college needed some work, and he was Robert Ryan's son, Tim. Now, these days, and for most of his life, he's been Walker T. Ryan, an incredibly fine blues guitarist in the Robert Johnson mode. Luke Askew and Don Stroud. There was someone else. It was Joy Bishop's kid, Larry Bishop. So they had these sort of scions of semi-famous people. We went out and they gave me a job on the film. Little did I know the only reason they did was that I'd be there to rewrite for day players' wages. So we went to Apache Junction in Arizona, and about, I think it was 23 days later, we had our movie. And that was the first time. When it opened in LA, there was no premiere or anything. It opened at the Fox Venice Theater. Jim Terrell put together, he collected cars and stuff. So we had an old-time Hollywood premiere with people driving up in these antique cars. It was a lot of fun. I had to buy everyone tickets, of course, but the price of fame.
What did that do for you? Did that help your career then?
It did. I mean, it meant I got to go to more meetings, and I think there were about 3 or 4 legitimate jobs that came out of it, of films that did not get made. So I probably wound up writing the 3 or 4 scripts that you need to get under your belt to start being decent at the game without having anything embarrassing show up in public.
When Cutter's Way came out, the same year The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper came out, which came first? Which did you write first?
Oh, Cutter. Cutter was long before that.
That's what I thought. I heard you were so broke you had to steal the book of Cutter and Bone?
I did. A friend of mine, Jacoba Atlas, connected in Hollywood. She had a friend, and Paul Gurian, and she recommended that Paul had come out, no Hollywood experience whatsoever. Oh, excuse me, that's not entirely true. He'd made, I think, 2 American short story efforts. One was Bernice Bobs Her Hair, maybe just that one. But he had somehow managed to snag a bunch of money from Bill Levitt, who was the son of the guy that invented Levittown, invented the suburbs. And they had a bunch of money, and he said, give me this amount of money, and I'll go make some movies. And I said, okay, let's see what that looks like. He came out here. He bought the book, Cutter's Way, optioned at the very least. And then I got a call, and he said, Kobe said, you're good. And, well, it's very kind of Kobe. He said, get this book. It's called Cutter's Way. Yeah, you can walk down to Pickwick and get it, and then we'll talk. But I didn't have a dime. I could not walk to Pickwick and get it. I could walk to Pickwick and shoplift it, however. I had that exact amount of money. And I got the book. I took it home. I did return it. It was a small copy. In somebody's copy of Cutter and Bone, there's a coffee circle on page 153. And I apologize for that, whoever paid for a slightly used book. And I read it, and then I called him, and I was very straightforward. I said, look, this is a wonderful character study. The whole last third of the book was just made in a film called Easy Rider. It's exactly the same, and we can't do that. We've got to do something else. But I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you. He said, you're my writer. And I thought for a second. I said, look, if it were any other circumstance, I would say thank you and take the money and on. But we're friends through Kobe. And I've got to be honest with you. You're new at this game. I don't bring any juice to this project. I'm not going to help you get it made. And then I heard the first of what Paul was going to be for the rest of his life. When he said, you're not listening. I said, you're my screenwriter. And it was very clear to me that I didn't need to argue because I wouldn't win the argument. I had told him what I needed to tell him. He had ignored it. And we went to work together. And though Paul can be less than politic, he is never less than brilliant. I think if he had been able to suffer fools a little more gladly, he would have had a much more successful career. Brilliant man. Wonderful guy. A lot of enemies. God knows Pastor had him kicked off the set, locked out during Cutter for a short period, but to make it clear that if you keep being an asshole, you're not going to be on the set. Life's too short. But Paul and I are still friends. I started writing. That's the only way I know how to solve problems. I occasionally, and to my pleasure, have worked with David Ward, partners on a couple of television things recently. And we differ in one really crucial aspect, which is I start writing and figure out where this is all going. And David figures out the last shot and reverse engineers the story from there. It's a very, it's, my only leads to less movies being made. Perhaps not being half as good, but that's what I did. I just started working on it. I said, well, we'll figure out when we get there. We would sit down and we would talk, what are we trying to do? well, we're trying to do a film noir, but without any of the obvious cliches of the genre. So we'll have a body, and if we can, let's put the audience in the position of Bone, where they can't be sure that what they saw in that alley is what Cutter wants it to be. And we won't know at the end either. And in fact, it may be made clear in the shooting of it, but it's never said aloud. The most J.J. Cord ever says is, what if it were? Or what if I did? He worked on it for a long time. Paul has a very different memory than I do about the endings, because I remember writing and going to David Field on one occasion and Stephen Bach on the other occasion with Passer in New York, and needing on at least 3 different occasions a new ending. None of the endings he's offering were what they wanted. Now, Paul assures me that those things never happened and that the ending that we put together was the ending we got or shot. The actual ending was, as far as I knew and still remember, was developed in the cutting room. I wasn't there, but I know what I'd seen in the dailies. I was a participant. We talked about what if we cut to black here, if we don't have any of this coda stuff we've been working on. They went in the cutting room with Caroline Ferriol. The next afternoon, we saw a cut, and it ended exactly as what you've seen. And that was it from there. But it had never been written as that. There was a coda. It was somewhat the same, but there was a coda. What happens to them afterward? In some of them, Cutter survived. In some of them, he didn't. In some of them, they figure out that it was so-and-so, but in others, they didn't. I think there was one, and this would have been well before Trading Places, or as Gurian always called it, Trading Races, that I think there's a shot on a yacht near a desert island, and clearly Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. You see this moment. And we had a scene very much like that. That was one of the ones that everyone decided, no, let's not do that.
So how does Ivan Passer get attached to this?
Pure Gurian. I remember him calling and saying, what do you think of Ivan Passer? I said, I don't know Ivan Passer. What does she do? And he said, no, Ivan, like Ivan, Ivan. It's a guy. He's a filmmaker. He's a director. He's a guy that wrote Loves of a Blonde and Fireman's Ball for Milos. He's really the brains behind Milos Forman. Paul tends to be hyperbolic about everything. And the fact is, you can never be sure. If you say, I went to Malibu for an alfresco lunch, he'll say, I ate the Sahara for lunch. And you damn well better check for grit in his teeth before you say bullshit, because it is conceivable that Paul ate the fucking Sahara for lunch. I remember one time he was talking somewhere, just talking, maybe at dinner, and he started reminiscing about how he was on the BSA motorcycle team in Europe. And I finally said, no, I'm sorry. I call bullshit. I know we've had to accept a lot of and blah, blah, blah. And he says, no, it's true. I said, no, it's not true, Paul. Maybe you owned a BSA motorcycle in Europe. Maybe. Though probably it was a Moto Guzzi. And he said, just a minute. He walked away and he came back with like half a dozen photographs of him with a BSA motorcycle team in their colors, clearly a member of the team. Ever since then, I have not challenged the I ate the Sahara for lunch because, man, he just might have done that in the same way that he took an absolutely unknown screenwriter and convinced Universal to hire him. Anyway, he called, he said, well, come down to set. It was some screening room in town. He wanted me to see a movie called Intimate Lighting. And I saw it about 85 minutes long, black and white film about some musicians, a classical musician of some fame, coming back through the town that he grew up in and seeing all of his friends who still play together, but none of them has reached his particular level of expertise. I don't know if you've seen it or not, it's a masterpiece. As soon as the screen went black, I just said, if you can get him, I will argue for him, with David. And I didn't have to. David was really smart and thought, you know what? Let's go with this guy. So that was Paul. I don't know how Paul discovered it at all. Bridges used to call him even passive. And that seems right until you push, as Paul found out. This is someone that got out of Czechoslovakia, made films there under the communist regime, and left home for good, turned his back on everything he knew. He is someone who wants everyone in the crew to feel as if that they're participating. One of his first days, he says, those of you in craft services, if you don't do your job, if you don't have good donuts, we're going to have a shitty day. Everyone has to bring the A game. And anybody that has an idea, and I don't care, craft services, key grip, whatever if you have an idea that I should hear, come and tell me. If I don't like it, not a problem. But what if I do? That's where he begins. But he doesn't get in the way. He'll wait for Jordan to say, here's how I think we should shoot this. When I made Crackers with Louis Malle, Louis takes on every film as if it's the enemy. And if it's like a giant bull and it must be wrestled to the ground or it will kill you. Passer is monolithic. He swirls the cape, he lets the bull go by, and when he needs to, he stabs it. He was a joy. He's was incredibly smart, a great chess player, so he never ran out of things to do. And unlike most American directors, he had begun as a writer and appreciated what I might be able to bring to the party if he didn't stomp on me too hard. He would have me every night. He loved actors, but he didn't trust their processes. So he had me rewriting pages. The first week, we would get together after dinner. He would give me some notes, and he would say, go do this. And I would go do it, and I'd give him the pages, and he would say, great, we'll have these printed up. After 3 or 4 days of this, I realized he wasn't really having them printed up. Everybody thought they were going to get new pages, so they didn't do a lot of homework. And when they got on set, they got the old pages, and they had to use their instinct, which he did trust. That's another way in which he directed. But he didn't change a word. Occasionally, if it was necessary, at a certain point, about 3 weeks in, Lisa Eichhorn came to him and wanted me to be there and said, I don't think my character would say this. And I was about to say, well, isn't that sweet? You're going to fucking say it anyway. And Yvonne said, Lisa, why don't you go home and write what you think she would say? And she was delighted and she went off. And I said, Yvonne, I know what's going to happen. This was 8 words. You are going to get a paragraph or possibly 2 of dialogue that she thinks needs to be said. And he said, that is correct. And what I want you to do, Jeffrey, is read those 2 paragraphs and find the one sentence that actually might belong there. And if you need to massage it, massage it. And if you don't, we'll go with that sentence. And that's exactly what happened. And I learned a very important lesson, which is by the 3rd week, it's their character, not mine anymore. Except for the difficulty that Paul had, having chosen the jockey, he still wanted to ride the horse. And that always can be difficult. Aside from that, it was almost all of it. Really a fun, easy set. I didn't know it at the time. The only difficulties that I can remember were the difficulties between Passer and Paul, which were pretty legion. One day, Stephen Elliott threw a tantrum in front of the crew, throwing his sides up in the air and saying he couldn't read this shit. And I was ready to kill him, and Passer, as usual, said, no, you don't want to kill him. We have paid him a lot of money to be here today. You need to get him to say the lines. He said, he won't say them. He hates it. And I hate him. He says, no, you don't hate him. You have to understand him. He is an actor who's been doing this forever. This is an important role, but it's a very small role. It's one day, plus 1 day with a second unit director outdoors. You need to talk to him, let him know what you were thinking, and he will find in whatever you say what he needs, because right now he's scared to death that his one shot is not going to happen correctly. And I went and talked to him, and it was over within 5 minutes. And we shot the scene, and he was wonderful. It was a slow shoot, which we knew it would be, because Jordan Cronenweth had been in a car accident. My understanding is that's what happened. And he basically had to think through every physical move he made, walking, picking up a beer, whatever. He had to consider it before he could do it, which meant you were going to lose some number of setups a day. And that just was the fact of working with him. And in exchange for making that accommodation, you got a truly, truly great cinematographer, a paint with light cinematographer. And I remember like the third, fourth day of shooting, he was very within himself. He was not outgoing. He was not jokey. He was there to do a job and to keep his body, together. He was scary in that way. But after 3 days of dailies, I felt I had to say something, and I went. He was sitting alone at the bar at the El Encanto, and I came up and I said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to tell you the dailies have been extraordinary. And my question is you have shot every single shot exactly as I imagined it to be. How do you do that? And he looked over and said, you should read the script. That was who Jordan was. He was good and warm and funny and not at all as standoffish as he appeared. But he mostly was there to work and was really good at it. For the most part, except for the difficulties with Paul and Yvonne, there were a few budgetary, you've got to get rid of this scene, and you've got to cut this because we just lost light, too soon tonight, and blah, blah, that kind of thing. But even under those conditions, I remember we were cutting scenes, and Yvonne wanted to cut the scene with the 6 white horses, or however many white horses we had, just cross in front of Bone's car. And I said, you can't cut that. He says, why not? It doesn't. I said, I know it doesn't do anything. It's to make the film profound. And he went along with it. He stood up for the shot. We got it. And something else got cut that I didn't care about. He was a poet. And so he understood that clownish part of myself.
How was the film handled upon release?
It was kind of a disaster. They put their money on feet. It came out without much heraldry or ballyhoo on a Wednesday. That's when films, showed up in the theaters then. It was in 5 or 6 metropolises. New York, LA, San Francisco, Boston, that kind of thing, Chicago. And the first reviews were terrible. Vincent Canby, I think it was Canby, just hated it. And nobody went to see it. And by Friday, the theater said, we cannot keep this for the full week. You have to give us something else. And they scrambled and they did whatever they had to do and they pulled it. And then the next week, the national reviews came out, and they were all pretty spectacularly good. And unfortunately, there was no place to go see this movie that had been well reviewed. Now, not all of them were. Dear Pauline Kael, my adored Pauline Kael, see, I believe the line was Alex Cutter is a one-armed, one-eyed, one-legged walking literary conceit. Now, I can't fault her on her accuracy there, but why not? What's wrong with that? Do we not need a couple of those every once in a while? But at least I got reviewed by her. That was okay. But there were some good reviews, and good enough, and the word of mouth was good enough, that Candy later on, I believe my memory serves, actually wrote a second review, a reconsideration of it. He didn't like it any better particularly, but he did feel he had to make a stronger case than the dismissive one that he had. They felt like they had something, but what do we do with it? And that's when Sony Classics was invented. It had not existed before Cutter. So we had Sony Classics, and it was a title change. So Du Côté de Chez Cutter, I guess, Cutter's Way. And we sent it to festivals, Houston and Seattle, and places that would appreciate actually getting it. And we went to all those places and, got whatever the award is they were throwing out at the time. And it kind of took off from there. I mean, it began its underground journey, which has continued pretty much to this day. Witness me talking to you on the phone.
John Hurd, he just rides that line where he could be almost a comic character because he could go over the top any second, but he seems to rein it in.
The first day of shooting was a long shot with Passer's rules of how to, make the first day easy, no dialogue, So it was a long shot of Cutter walking down a pier toward a boat. And none of us had seen him in his get-up. At least I hadn't. I'm sure Paul and Yvonne had seen him in it. With the leg, strapped up and the arm gone and the patch. And I was very far away. And I saw this character begin to stump down this pier. And all of a sudden, through the headset, there was no dialogue called for. I heard, ba-da-dum-bum-bum, da-da-da-da-dum-dum, and some gesture from Popeye the Sailor Man, and I just said, we've got our Cutter. We knew it beforehand, but we've got him. The odd one was, and this is Gurian again, United Artists, their studios dither until you actually are shooting because they are so terrified of spending all that money and being wrong. So they did it, and they make excuses, and they say, you've got to do this, and that's why we wrote 7 different endings, not because it needed 7 different endings, just because they needed to have something to do so they could bail if they needed to. And one of the things that they said was they had the dailies for, or maybe even the finished cut, for what they knew was going to be the biggest film ever, Heaven's Gate. And they said, you've got to get Bridges in this. The script was sent to Bridges, and he said, yeah, I'd love to play Cutter. And Gurian said, we've got to come out and talk about this. So Passer and Gurian go out to Jeff's ranch in Santa Barbara. And we pull into this long drive up through the gate and stop the car. You see Jeff opens the door, and out runs this pet dog. The dog is running toward the car, and Passer's looking at him and says, Paul, don't get out. I know dogs. I know hunting dogs. Do not. He's cross-eyed. He is, by which time Gurian, of course, had ignored Passer. Not for the first or last time. stepped out of the car, and the dog leaped up and bit him on the cheek, right under his eye. Blood everywhere. Bridges came out. He grabbed the dog, carried him, put him in the house, locked the door, said something on the order of the damn dog. We've got a plastic surgeon just living down the road. Let's run over there real fast. And so we go over, and finally there's, the work's been done. I get to go in and see Paul. He looks up, and his face is sewn up freshly with but bandages everywhere. And he looks at me and he winks. He says, I think we've got Bridges. And he basically said to Jeff, you can either work for me for the rest of your life for nothing, or you can work for me for 6 weeks and get $750,000. Your call. And Jeff is on the set, just a joy. He is everything you want the dude before he was even the dude to be. He has that wonderful sort of, there's a solidity, but a carelessness. He would come by the room where I was working every night and ask if I needed anything. Jeff Bridges is my gopher? This is crazy. It's just, and he has been lovely ever since. We're not close. I wish we were closer. But the times that we see each other, it's as if no time has passed.
I mentioned before the D.B. Cooper movie. Where does that fit into things?
Boy, I remember Cutter being completely over when I started working on that. I started with it. Steve DeJarnett was going to direct it. And I think when Dustin Hoffman, who at that time had a habit, because he was so in demand and so powerful, of glomming on the scripts that he thought he might, and he expressed interest, and the studio was like, yes. And DeJarnett, crazy, wonderful Steve DeJarnett, said no. If you insist on Hoffman, I'm going to have to walk. Walk he did. And I think next in line was Bob Petrie. I think I worked with Bob on it for a while. And then he quit, and he was replaced with Frankenheimer. And I worked with John for a while. As he himself put it, he made one of those 12-step calls where you call and apologize to the people you fucked over. I got one of those. As I told him, you know what? I got a chance to work with John Frankenheimer. You don't need to apologize for anything. But it was problematic. His day started at 5 o'clock with, so did Bob Petrie's, now that I think of it. They both had like big cola glasses of scotch. I mean, I never saw any major sign of it, but evidently that was only the beginning. And then they were making the movie with Treat and Catherine Harold and Duvall, and Buzz Kulick was directing. And I was not there on the set at all. I did get a call, I guess from Polygon as it moved to or started with or wherever it was. It was a mess. The whole time it was a mess. It was with John Peters and Peter Guber, I think at Peter Guber's house. And the meeting began with Peter saying, I want everyone, we've got to clear some air here. I want everyone to speak his mind, say whatever you honestly believe and feel. It will not leave this room. I think I was the only one that didn't buy that for a second. By the next day, Kulick was out. And then they brought in, they had me do umpteen different rewrites on it. I was rewriting it and then fired and then called back in, I think like 3 times. And then Spottiswoode came on. I think, they wanted him to direct a whole new movie and gave him enough money to make maybe a third of a movie. And so he did the best he could. And that was, that was the end. I didn't participate.
I know you worked a lot on Bosch. Is that still going on? Is that still happening? Will there be more?
No, I think the third year of Bosch Legacy will probably be the end. Almost for sure. They knew starting out that they were going to try to do 3 years of it. I don't know how it's doing. It's very hard to tell with Amazon what they want it for. Doing well or not doing well, it's hard to know. While I was there, seasons 3 through 7, it was one of the best work environments I've ever been to. We had 2 different showrunners, primarily the guy who created it with Mike, who figured out how to turn interior monologue books into dialogue books, and that would be Eric Overmyer. Brilliant playwright before he went into television. And then once you see The Wire, you realize this guy can do anything. Wonderful, wonderful writer, great human being. And Dan Pine, who came on the same year I did, but as a sort of second in command. And then on season 4, Amazon asked Eric to bail them out. They were in deep trouble, Man in the High Castle. So Eric went over and took over that job, and Dan took over the Bosch season. Eric still was there. He still read everything, but he wasn't there all the time. Dan was in charge, and he's every bit as wonderful as Eric. It's bizarre. It was such a warm place that I didn't even feel good hating some of my co-writers. I think I kept it from most of them, but maybe not all.
What are you working on these days?
When I left there, this is the show was canceled problem. I had been working on a feature for a long time and waiting until COVID had moved along to submit it anywhere. And that would have been sometime, maybe back in April or anyway. Unfortunately, the story took place in Tsarist Russia, and there's no way anybody's going to want us for another decade or so. Anyway, I developed a couple of things with David Ward, one with Tony Bill, and the 3 of us going out. I just had a meeting on an original of my own, a noirish piece for a series. The world is in television, and whatever I write is not what people think they're looking for right now. I could not write with a straight face for somebody in a leotard. Just couldn't do it. And I have no problem looking at them. It's like writing comedy. I write funny things, but if you say I'm writing a comedy, I'll turn you down cold. Ward can do both. David's a joy. He is actually, oddly enough, an underappreciated genius.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time. This was so great talking with you.
My pleasure. I hope there's something useful here.
All right, up next is actor Arthur Rosenberg. How did you decide to become an actor in the first place?
When I was a kid in New York, parents used to send us all to summer camp because my mother used to say the hot city is no place for a young man. And we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have, we lived in Queens in an apartment. And so I would go to summer camp. My brother loved it. My brother ultimately bought a horse growing up, went to dude ranches. Death of a Salesman. He was Biff. Our father was a traveling salesman, and I was happy. So I went to summer camp. I hated every minute of it. I was a fat kid, and I was always the last picked on anything. Shirts and skins was a horror to me, playing basketball. But the drama club gave me a chance to feel like I was an equal or something. So I did those little plays in camp, and it caught it gave me something. And as I got older, I went to Performing Arts High School in New York, Fame, where I was the disc jockey at lunchtime. And then I went to Carnegie Tech and then went on and did theater and that sort of thing. So I guess you'd have to say it was Camp Cherokee in the Pocono Mountains. So I went to Stella Adler and studied there along the way and so forth. But I think it was the little boy who couldn't fit in anywhere else.
When did you make that move to Los Angeles and start working out there?
1976. I had been working in the theater, and most recently I was in St. Louis at the Loretto Hilton Repertory Company in St. Louis. I'd been there 8 years. It was time to move on. I was 30 years old, and the producer gave me a lifetime contract. As long as you want to be here, we will hire you. And I thought, 30 years old is way too young to be signing your last contract of your life. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly. So I just picked Los Angeles, never been there, had no idea how it worked, nothing. Drove out to Los Angeles and started to hit the pavement, which you do in New York, but you don't do in Los Angeles. I didn't know. I went to the union. I said, where are the agents? What street are they on? Like New York. And they said, they're not on a street. And I said, well, can you give me a list of the agents? And they said, it's, a couple inches thick. And so I got some pictures made and whatever. And I started going to agents' offices, until I found somebody who would take me.
What were your early jobs like out there?
Well, I think my first job was on Beretta at Universal. My agent said to me, look, there's a part for a coroner. It's just you and Robert Blake. You'll have 2 scenes. It's really okay. But let me tell you, it's your first job. And Robert Blake is not tall, and you're tall. And you want to keep the job and you want to make a career. That's why you're there. So just behave yourself. And I said, okay. So I'd never been on a set before, ever. I'd worked in the theater all through the night. They keep sending me scripts with the changes and the orange, green, yellow, red, the page. And sometimes on a page, there's just a period where there was a comma, but you have to learn. So I learned, 23 variations of the same lines. So I get in the morning and I meet Robert Blake and he says to me, do you know your lines, partner? And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Blake. And he said, well, we do a little thing around here called improvise. Oh, why have I been up all night? Then I turn around and I look behind me and it's like the set was real. It was like, I'm used to the theater where things were 2-dimensional. In Hollywood, they build everything. So I go into this real place. And if I didn't know from watching movies as a kid, I wouldn't know how to start. The director goes, and action. And I wouldn't know cut. I mean, I saw it in movies like everybody else did. The cameraman is holding his hand and telling me what size lens they're shooting with. I don't know what any of that means. I've never been in any of this stuff before. I did Shakespeare. It was an incredible learning experience. Then my agent said, there's this movie, Oh God, George Burns. And he says, Carl Reiner's directing. So I got you an interview. You're going to go to Carl Reiner's house. He doesn't read actors, he meets them. So my second job interview, I go to Carl Reiner's house. I'm sitting outside and Carl looks at me and says, you look like my son. And I said, is that good or bad? He said, it's good for you. You have a job. Okay. Thanks for coming by. And so I had a job and things sort of just kind of happened that way. And after a short period of time, I would like to call my career was like a designated hitter in baseball. They would give me a job. My job was to get in there, do it right the first time, don't make mistakes so that the star can make all the mistakes or do all the takes. But my job was to be rock solid. I did a movie a movie of the week. It was I think it was 4 hours with Chris Christopherson in Honolulu called Blood and Orchids. In one scene, they had the camera mounted on a track to do a traveling shot. It was a hot day. We're having a little trouble in there, I guess. And we're up to something like 12 takes. And Chris was having a little problem with one of the lines. And it happens. The 12th time when he did it right, the camera went over my foot. And I didn't say a word until somebody said, cut. And I went, Arr! Because my job was to make room for him, the time for him, you don't want to be a pain in the ass. If you can come in, know your lines, do your job, which seems like the minimum daily requirement, if you were a vitamin, if you just do that, then people will want to work with you.
You work with some heavy hitters. I mean, you already mentioned Carl Reiner, but you're working with Milius and Hal Ashby. I mean, right out of the gate.
Other actors say, "Well, it was your talent." I don't know how much of this is luck, having an agent who has good relationships with other people. I don't know. I know with Hal Ashby, I did Coming Home, and then he just called and said, "I'm doing another movie," and it was Being There. And he said, "I just want you to do this part." And I was pleased and happy to.
Did you have that a lot in your career, just kind of working with the same folks and having that reputation?
Usually I got passed around. People would pass me around, or I'd work for the same person. You kind of develop a little reputation. There was a producing company called Green Epstein, and they used to do movies of the week, which were always The Cause. They did Fallen Angel, which was about teenage prostitution. They did all these sort of back in the 70s when, it was Cause of the Week. And so I was in most of their Cause of the Week things. I was a lawyer. I was a pimp. I was a this. I was, and Alan and Jim, God bless them both. Alan's no longer with us. They would just call and say, "I got a part for you. Call your agent. Tell him to call me." And it was lovely.
Tell me about getting the role in Cutter and Bone.
The story goes, and this is from Paul Gurian, who's the producer, and Jeffrey Alan Fiskin, who is the screenwriter. I wouldn't know this because I wasn't there. They were watching a screening of a film, I guess at the Directors Guild or something, and I came on the screen, and Gurian said, "Him! I want him!" I mean, it sounds like a bad movie. And the next thing I know, my agent, Susan Smith, says, "The producer of this film just wants to offer you a part. You've never met him. You've never read the script. But I'll tell you, it's a good part." And I said, "Okay." And they said, and here's how much they're going to pay you. It was more than I was making. And I mean, everything was done. And I walked in and I met with Paul and Jeffrey and some others. And the guys just kept staring at me and smiling. And I said, "What are you smiling about?" And they said, "We had another actor cast in the part, but you're George Swanson. You just are. When we saw you on the screen the other night, you're George Swanson." And I thought, well, somebody's obviously, I thought this was before Ashton Kutcher and Punked. I thought somebody was punking me. I kept saying, "Did somebody put you up to this?" So that was that. So that's how I got the part.
How do you prepare for a role like George?
I think you prepare for any role the same way, which is obviously you read the script and you figure out how you are like that person. Because there's no point in going to how you're not like them, because you can't not act something, right? So you find the ways in which you're like the person. And if there's some physicality to it or whatever, it depends upon what the part is. But you just have to find the truth within you and just show up. And I don't forget who said it. It was some great person who said, "Just show up and talk and listen. Know what the story is. Know where you are in the story. It's very important that you know what the spine of it is, where the story is, where it is in development, so that the choices you make are appropriate." Actors in Hollywood tend to be rather lazy about that. Theater actors are not, about knowing the whole picture, about knowing where it's going, not just about your line. It was from the beginning, it was kind of wonderful. We had a table reading at Paul Gurian's house. The cast was there and so forth. And we just read around the table and talked about the story a little bit. Then the hard part, you said, how do you prepare for George? I had to play polo and tennis, neither of which are in my DNA as a Jewish boy from Forest Hills, Queens. None of them. So they set me up with tennis lessons with this pro in Encino and horseback riding in Sylmar at this ranch. I'd never exercised a day in my life. So you can imagine, after doing 2 hours of tennis and 2 hours of horseback a day, I would come home and sit in the bathtub and cry because I hurt everywhere. When we got to film the polo scene in Santa Monica in the polo ground, I think it was Will Rogers, polo. They had the Santa Monica Mounted Police as a polo team, and then there was our team. And I was just putchking around on a horse in Silmar, riding in circles in a pen. Ivan Passer says, okay, we're going to do this scene now. George, you're going to go up and you're going to whack the ball, and everybody's going to come after you. And I said, okay. So I'd never done this before in my life. I'm sitting on this horse, and they say, and they put in the grass some tape so you know where you're going. So all I got to do is make the horse go, put him in drive, and head for the ball, and then kind of lean over and take a swing at it, right? So I go, hey, Arthur, and action. So I get about 3 steps with the horse, and he goes, and team action. And I hear, and I hear this. All around me are horses, and I froze. And I said, I can't do this. And I jumped off the horse. I said, I can't do this. Ivan, I can't do this. I'm scared. And they found one of the stunt guys who was close in my size. And so he did the goal. I wore the clothes. He did the goal.
What was it like working with Ivan Passer?
He was such a smart man and a nice man. He was very kind to the actors. He knew what he wanted. He was very clear about his vision for the film, but he was not overbearing. He was very kind, but he could keep the whole thing in his head. It's a director's job. But there was something special about him. He was very special. He had a way of talking to people. But I learned the most about acting on that film from Jordan Cronenweth, who was the cinematographer, because he would light things with silks and not with lights. And I remember there's one scene that we did, Jeff Bridges and I were in Santa Barbara at my office, on the boat dock there on the pier. And we waited there for hours and hours. And I'm thinking, we're not shooting anything. What are we waiting for? And Jordan needed the light to be just right. He wasn't using spotlights or any of that. He was using silks, just silks. And he said, when the light is right, we have one shot at this. So we have to do it right. So Jeff and I went upstairs and we just kept rehearsing the lines over and over again. So neither one of us would screw up. And we sort of did it in one shot and a couple of, camera changes. But just because of that. And I would go over to him and I'd say, tell me why what you're doing is important. And he said, because there's no light really that can match natural light. It just has so much in it. And he said, to get a real look, cinema verite look, you have to use real light. And so that's what he did. It was an incredible group of people. It was an art venture.
I had heard stories that Paul Gurion could be a little tyrannical on set. Is that true?
Not to me. I was there every day of that movie, and I just think he was the sweetest guy in the world. Maybe when I wasn't there, he had something or another, but he's just really a good guy, and he cared so much about that film. I never saw an ounce of it. I didn't see an ounce of ego on anybody's part. Every time I saw people speaking, it was respectful. I never heard people yelling and screaming during filming. Afterwards, in their private lives, yeah. But during the filming, no. It was really interesting. Stephen Elliott, who played Cord, the villain of the film, with the sunglasses with the mirrors on them, Stephen was cast because originally in the story, I was the killer. George Swanson was the killer. So that's why it was important that Stephen and I resemble each other, at least in the dark. So we had the same kind of hair and mustache and that sort of thing. And Stephen was actually quite upset at the audition when they wanted me to read with him and they wanted to look at us together. And so he said, what is this, a beauty pageant or something? And he got very offended. And I took him outside and I said, don't blow this, Steve, because I knew him. I said, Stephen, don't blow this. He had a very hot temper. And I said, there's a mistaken identity in this film. Well, they didn't give me the whole script. I said, well, I'm telling you, there's a thing. And so we have to kind of look like each other a little bit. Oh, so, and they really wanted him and they got him. And so we get down toward the end of the film. I think it was United Artists Classics. Toward the end of it, we're doing this, the last scene where shots are fired and that sort of thing. And the word comes down on the set that George didn't do it. Cord did it. And because Stephen Elliott had a bigger name. He was a known actor, and I couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. So at the beginning of the scene, in the beginning of the film, when the body is dumped on a dark, rainy night in Santa Monica in Venice, that's me. I was driving the car. I was dumping the body. That was me. It wasn't J.J. Cord. That's how I became the villain of the film and then not the villain of the film.
Did they have a big reveal for you? Did you have lines around that when you were going to say?
There were some lines around it, which were cut on the set that day.
Literally the last day.
Around the last couple of days.
Wow. That's remarkable.
Yeah, I was upset, but what can you do?
Well, yeah, you're such a big character in that movie because you tie the two worlds together. Because otherwise, there's no tie between Cord and Cutter, and then you're right there in the middle with Bone as well, working. Him working for you. I mean, you're such a central part to that entire film.
And then not, and that's Hollywood. And then not. What if Frankenstein weren't a monster? What if you were a model? It's show business, right?
So how was it working with, so many great actors, but especially with Cutter and Bone and then Lisa Eichhorn as well? Everybody
stayed in character a lot and was totally focused. There were no real shenanigans going on. Everybody, we filmed it up in Santa Barbara, and we were staying for the most part at the El Encanto, which is a very pretty hotel. I went there 2 years ago to a wedding, and it looks nothing like the El Encanto I stayed in. I think it's was at that time owned by the Orient Express people, maybe Waldorf. I don't know who owns it now. I walked in and I said, this is probably going to bore you to death, but the main desk for the hotel used to be here, and the staff was really interesting. The old guy is telling them what the property used to look like, and there used to be cottages over here, and there was this and that, and it's of course completely different. So we were all staying there, and everybody was really into doing the picture. To say that people were nice sounds kind of Pollyanna. People were who they are, but there wasn't a lot of drama. The crew were terrific, right down to Hudson Marquez, who was the boom guy, a lovely guy, terrific guy, tell New Orleans stories and stuff. There was just something wonderful for me about that the set, the production, Santa Barbara. The town wanted us there because it had old Spanish days in the film, and that's a big thing of pride. So the town was happy for us to be there. It was before Hollywood's trashy image. We're still doing good stuff.
What were some of your favorite memories from making that one?
There are a bunch of them. I mean, for example, there's a scene where the house burns down in the movie. They actually burned a house down. I remember we were standing in the middle of the street, and Yvonne said, okay, we can't do this too many times because we're burning a house down. And we were standing in the street and watching it and just feeling the heat coming off that. I don't think I was ever that close to a fire before. That was remarkable. There was something very eerie and sad about at the marina when I got to break the message that Mo was dead. There was something very eerie about that scene for me, to go into the boat and tell him. And I just had one word, Mo. Of course, the parade is an undying memory for me. Again, the kid from New York sitting on a horse all day, trotting up State Street forever, all day long. back and forth. Hey, Richie, how do I look? Like a fat man on a horse, George. What? But the whole town was there, and everybody was so excited that you're making a movie about our Spanish days. And they were, the town folk were so happy that we were there. It was truly remarkable. It really was. Every memory I have of that film was a good one. And Ann Dusenberry was in the film. Just a lovely, lovely gal, good actress, has had a nice long career. We didn't have personality conflicts of any kind.
Which is pretty remarkable, especially when you have, you said that people stayed in character. I mean, the Cutter character himself, John Hurd.
Oh, he stayed in character. Yeah.
That's an intense character.
It's not Home Alone, John Hurd. He was very tortured. As I said, he didn't break character on that. He was hard drinking, everything about him. You could say, I couldn't say good morning to him without getting a smart ass. He stayed that way. One of the luncheon scenes was filmed at Jimmy's in Century City. And I think it was just open then, maybe a year when that was there. It was a really upper class place. And we did the lunch scene there. And I remember the scene with the horse coming through the outdoor party and throwing John Hurd across the table. Of course, the stuntman did that. I think his name was Billy Burton. In fact, I'm sure his name was Billy Burton. Just did this incredible stunt. He did it one time. It was just great. I mean, the stunt people on that film were terrific. The horse folks who wrangled the horses there, it's frozen in my memory as just an incredible. And I was in, being there and coming home and lots of other big pictures, big important films. But there was something about this little film that was very important, I thought. There was just passion coming out of everybody on that film. Everybody who was there because they wanted to do the movie, not because they wanted to make a point in their career, make some more money. I think it was all about commitment to the film, to the story.
Well, it's good since the actual movie company didn't have any faith in it. It sounds like, unfortunately.
I don't get higher up to the boardroom or anything like that, so I don't know how that all sort of unfolded. But it was very popular in Europe, and it did okay here. It's its own thing. It's its own film. It was Cutter and Bone when we did it. Changed it to Cutter's Way, which I never liked because it reminded me of that Ronnie Cox TV show, Apple's Way. Cutter's Way, brought to you by Mott's.
It must be a very different experience for you once you're done with a movie, that the movie ends up having a life of its own and you end up going your own way and moving on to the next thing. When do you realize, oh, this movie does have a life of its own, that it is, now much more popular than it was when it first came out? I mean, there's a nice big Blu-ray edition that's supposed to come out, I think, any day now. I mean, it's got to be kind of an odd thing, because I know you've been in a lot of movies where they just kind of have their lives of their own and come back after you. Like Footloose is one of them.
Yeah, I remember there was this big party at Paramount Studios when they put out their, I don't know if it was Blu-ray then, it was just probably DVD of Footloose and Grease. There was one other. Big hoopla. I'm just glad I was part of it. It doesn't do anything for me now. It's something I did, and I was very sad when it was over because I really liked it. And then you move on.
You worked in the industry for, 40 years? It was a long time. You're not doing that anymore. What happened with that?
I'm in the industry in a different way. I work for the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is out in Woodland Hills. And it's where there's a residential community. And we also have health centers around. And it's a big charity, a not-for-profit charity, and so forth. So in that sense, I'm still part of the industry. I had a spiritual awakening in 1992. It can happen in show business. I was very much into myself, and all I wanted to do was be rich and famous and be in movies and have people love me and that sort of thing. And I came to a 12-step meeting, and I found that there was a whole other part of life. It's called humanity. and caring about other people and so on, and being honest and all of that. And I slowly went through a process of learning how to be a person, how to be real. It kind of took over my life. And first I became a rabbi, then I became a chaplain, and now I'm a palliative care chaplain for the Motion Picture and Television Fund. And I work only with people in the industry. So when somebody says, when somebody comes to our care and goes, "Oh, that agent," I know what that means. Or that producer, I work for that producer. Oh, yeah, I understand. I get it. I mean, I understand the references of the people. I understand the concerns, and I understand the personality. In a way, I'm a culture broker for the rest of the team because I understand the culture of show business and the insecurities and the hopes and dreams and all of that of people in the industry, no matter where they are, whether in distribution or PR or this or that. I get it. I understand why people do what they do, what they're hoping to get out of it, what they feel a part of, and all of it. So it really informs my work.
What's remarkable that you would do that rather than go back to St. Louis and take them up on that offer from all those years ago?
Well, they wouldn't want me now.
Oh, man. But you had a lifetime gig. Come on.
I've had several lifetimes of things that I've done in my life. I mean, I was a college professor for 8 years. I was an actor for 40 years. I've been a chaplain now for 18, 19 years. I've had several lifetimes in this lifetime. It's all good.
Mr. Rosenberg, thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Up next, we're going to hear from actress Ann Dusenberry.
I was an actor since I was a kid on stage, and it was in our local YWCA in Tucson that I did 2 shows a year on stage. So I was already there. So when I wanted to go to college, I knew I wanted to do theater, and I got into rep theater. And then I workshopped in LA after university. And then I auditioned. I don't know which came first. I dated a Teamster who worked at Universal, and he said, "I have access to inter-office mail envelopes. And what we could do is because I didn't have an agent, what we could do is slip your picture and resume, which didn't amount to anything, into these inter-office envelopes and address them from Tannen or, these heavy up the top, president of the studio to the casting office." So I got a call from Joe Rich in casting, who then became a good friend, his wife and I, and he said, "I don't know how I got your picture. It came in from an office envelope." And I was in her office, and I was like, "I don't know. I just played dumb, And I went in and met with him, and he said, "You need an agent." And I went to Dale Garrick, who was this wonderful, older, seasoned agent who had no clout. He was just around a long time, but he was a good guy. He got pictures taken for me, and we got started. So that was that. And I did some AFI.
Oh, the Tarzana?
Tarzana, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we actually had Steve on the show before.
Oh, Steve DeJarnett, yeah. Which was great. I have a missing digit, one of my, the last digit of my little finger. Anyway, so we used that in the film. It was great. I loved it. It was just so fun. So then they said, somebody said you might want to audition for Monique James, who was head of talent or the stable of actors she oversaw at Universal. So I auditioned with a scene in her office, and then she signed me to that contract system where I was for 4 years before they closed it. So it was 77, I want to say, until 80 or 76 to 80, in which time I did Jaws 2, and they loaned me out for Cutter's Way. And I did a lot there. And, some of it was just stupid, mindless, episodic stuff. But still, I made lots of connections and interwove myself into different projects and got off the lot and loaned out for things like Cutter's Way and Heartbeat. And I don't remember my other loan outs, but yeah, it was a good time there. And I got 4 years in before the system closed out entirely. I got to be, wardrobed for Little Women by Edith Head. And I mean, I got some beautiful memories from working there.
So how did you get the role for Cutter's Way?
Von Passer wanted me. So I went in and met with him. And I think Jeff was in there. Not John, but Jeff. It was Jeff. I think it was Yvonne that wanted me. See, Universal wasn't pushing anything. I may have been with CAA by then, and they were pushing me there. But yeah, I don't recall exactly. But I know Yvonne was a fan. So I think it was a big push through him.
And you had worked with John before on Heartbeat, correct?
I had worked with John before. We had a history. We had really great, I loved those two pieces, independent as they were and edgy as they were and periods that they were. I mean, I just loved both of those for their period and their stuff. It was great. Yeah.
How do you find a character, especially like Valerie from Cutter's Way?
Valerie was complicated because in the book she was two people. And so there were scenes that were undefined. That's the best word I can think of on the spot here, where there wasn't an understanding of motivation. I didn't know what my motivation was often. And I actually got into a little bit of trouble because right before we filmed a piece that never appeared in the film, we filmed in a hotel room with Cutter, Bone, and me, talking about what they were going to do next. I know the night before I called the director, I think, and said, I don't know what I'm supposed to bring to this as far as my reason for being with these guys at this point. Is it just sexual attraction to Jeff's character? What is it? Is it one-upping Lisa's character? I mean, I don't know what I'm doing here. And he was like, we just have to trust. The script is written. We'll just show up and see what happens. And I got in the next day and the producer pulled me aside and he said, that's verboten. You don't do that. You don't call behind the scenes to talk to the director. You go through me. Oh, shit. I didn't understand the protocol. I was just terrified because we were going into shooting and I was trying to learn the lines and not understanding what the hell what I was going to say, why I was saying that, why I did that, what am I doing here? And again, we're going to go back to the fact that they didn't know. I really think they didn't know. Or they wouldn't have bothered filming it because it wasn't video those days. We were spending good money. I was conscious of all that and thinking I wasn't coming prepared. When I do that, I go into my imagination and I just put my humanness into what it is that character's dealing with because I've never been where she is, but I can only imagine. And so I just do my work with my imagination. I'll say that. And not method per se as much as just trust. The writing is where everything originated, from the book to the screenplay. And in that writing is all that I need to know. And again, if I have a question, I go to the people who are overseeing it all and seeing the whole picture that I might not know what that is the goal for it. Then I can adjust. But generally, it's my imagination that I rely on and trust that the people with me will say, that's not the direction we're going, bring her back, take her here, and move from organic, imaginative place is how I work.
Because your character's a real wild card. You come in as the sister of this slain girl. What is your motivation? Are you there for revenge? Are you there for money? Are you there to seduce Cutter or Bone? You are this kind of unknown factor, which I appreciate. You're almost a femme fatale, but not quite.
But I don't start out that way at all. Homespun, drab, non-essential to anything character who gets some and has a really good time. And I think that's part of it. I think her sister was like that. And I admired her for that. And I didn't have that in my life. And all of a sudden, these attractive guys were looking at me. And I had an opportunity to be her. She was gone. And I don't know what my relationship with her is exactly. I think there was a great deal of sadness and shock that she was gone. But there was something in there that was, I could be like that too. And I think that's what it was for Valerie. It was just, I could be that too. dangerous, though. She got killed. So what's that look like? These guys were really attractive and they had good times. And I don't think Valerie had that till she met them. Got in over her head completely.
I read that scene that you're talking about in the hotel room where you pretty much turn on those guys. You have been compromised, it sounds like. And I agree, it just doesn't work. But at the same time, you just kind of disappear from the movie, which is sad.
And then I'm gone. I didn't make the compromise, It's weird, right? I mean, people still to this day go, where'd she go? Like, I don't know how we justify that. There wasn't any instigation of it. It just was done. As a co-star, I guess that's believable enough. Third, fourth character, not Lisa. Resolution, non-existent, didn't happen. Yeah, I don't know how to explain that any better than they made a decision in the editing that it wasn't worth the time.
What other memories do you have of making the movie?
Walking around Santa Barbara. It's just beautiful. I remember taking a walk from the hotel up in the hills where we were filming and editing down to the pier where we shot another scene on a boat with Jeff and I. That was a great walk and a beautiful walk. This town is just gorgeous. And then memories of filming in the city and finding a toy store that doesn't exist anymore. And Jeff and I going into this toy store and buying these beautiful Steiff. I don't know if you know Steiff. They were made famous by Teddy Roosevelt because they were German and they made a teddy bear for him. So Steiff is a German company that makes stuffed animals. And so there were these stuffed puppets that he got a rabbit and I got a leopard and I still have it. That was a sweet day. I don't know. I'm a social creature. So what did I take from the filming of it? Other than that scene in the hotel room, which was just terrible, frustrating, I felt lost. And then it wasn't even in the film because it was clearly not meant to be. Ivan Passer was just a really, really great director as far as an actor goes because I felt trusted and I felt I could trust him. It was a mutual let go. We've got this. I've got this. We're good. And faith in me. So he was a really fine director to work with. And I love John. Sorry, he's gone. We had those two films together were really great for both of us and really good work for him. Yeah, our paths crossed for some good reasons. And Jeff's still a friend. He still lives here part of the time. Though the mud flows hit him hard and he had to relocate. We were neighbors. He was right up the street from where we are, and the mud came through his house. So it was not good. He was evacuated by a helicopter, he and Susan. So it wasn't a good scene that day. We made out okay where our home is. But so as far as Cutter and Bone or Cutter's Way, wasn't on the set in some of the more dramatic moments, but we did go on location. Well, I was living in LA then. It wasn't location. It was all LA. It was all LA. Yeah. So we were there. We were downtown and all around. It was a great film to play on. I have to tell you a story, and I feel really badly about this because the characters in it, this was real life. I bumped into John Byram on the pier in Santa Monica while we were filming. And John and I had done a film together. I loved him. I mean, he's a really great director. And we talked about, I don't know when we talked, the earlier last year, 2021, 22. And he was telling me about that night and how he was walking the pier and bumped into us on the set. And he was walking with some huge character from the 60s who was arrested and put in jail for smoking pot. And we all know his name, and I can't think of it now. I'm going to have to email it to you. Because this guy was looking to John to write a biopic film for him. He was being looked for by the CIA and FBI because he was under suspicion for being radical, and they were going to pin marijuana on him. So there was that. I don't know if you know about that whole syndrome, but wherever there was anybody under in the Black Panther or the SDS or anything like that, the pinning would be ostensibly not about dissent, but about use of drugs. The Beatles had it. I mean, all these people were being pinned for, or the Stones, I should say, really. Just because they shook up the world, they had to pin them down on something. But it was a fascinating, whoa, really, John? I didn't remember meeting him because I was completely absorbed in the role. and learning the blocking, the lines, the timing, the whatever that we were doing with the gun and the I wasn't remembering that night, except that I met John and he told me who was with him. Abby Hoffman. Sorry, that's totally fits. I just got Abby. So there we are.
You have been in so many things over the years. What have been some of your other favorite roles to do?
Oh, Heartbeat. Heartbeat was my first favorite. I always just really loved that film and the characters in it. Working with Lucille Ball was outrageously beautiful, and Gail Gordon. I mean, those two people, just being there with them, the cast all around. We got to work with some of the greatest stars there were at the time, who were all aging, like Lucy, and I mean Audrey Meadows, and oh my God, we really had a really good time, and it was a poignant time for her. So I was happy to be a part of the love of that. And the mark, totally missed the mark, and I know that, and we all knew it as we kept doing it, saying it's not making the ratings because it's really one-dimensional, and it's past. Those stories don't play anymore with the Golden Girls and Cosby. It's not fit. It isn't fit for publication anymore. So it was time to stop. What else did I love? I loved some of my episodic stuff to work with. I mean, working on Remington Steele with Stephanie Zimbalist and Ms. Brosnan. I mean, that was great. I would have loved to have had a series like that on the air.
What was Lucy like in real life?
Very strong and private, but big-hearted, and I think lonely. I think it was hard getting old. It wasn't the golden or the baby boomers there are today, where everything is sort of fashioned for us now. In that era, ageism was huge, and the press was cruel. It was unyieldingly cruel, and that's one of the reasons I think I stepped away from the industry when I did in '86. I saw how poorly this icon could be treated in her years. How would I fare, you know? She was one of the most accomplished women in the industry. And yet, in the end, they just took her down. They just felt it was their privilege to say how horrible she was, which was beyond the pale, you know? She didn't deserve that. Fine and dandy, just diss the series and the writing or the producing or the whatever, but she showed up full tilt boogie. I mean, she was in her 70s and she was right on the mark. She was so present. She didn't miss a beat. She knew exactly what she needed to do, and she showed up like a champ. That's what an actor does. So to take her down and say she should stay home and play backgammon, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. So that hurt her. In reflection, we all felt hurt for her. And I blame the press. I think they really didn't need to do that. The critics didn't need to do that. She is royalty. And if you talk to any comedian today, she was central to their understanding of comedy and their way of working. I mean, from Carol Burnett all the way. So, no, that was wrong. And I lost my taste for working in the industry a bit from that.
Did I read right now that you're teaching?
I have gone. I haven't in a while gone to the schools locally here and worked with the kids in theater. So, I mean, it's been a while and I'm not doing it now. I taught voice, a particular vocal awareness technique called vocal awareness for one-on-one work. And I directed West Side Story for the local junior high here with other actors who were musically inclined and dance inclined. I did the directing. So it was really, really great. I mean, I love working with kids. I'm good with that. Yeah.
What have you been up to lately?
Theater, just theater. I gave it a shot for a year. I went back and thought I'd roll with whatever came. Got an agent, but only in commercials. I figured I'd see what was there, just for fun to be back in it. And nothing came, absolutely nothing. I don't think I'm made out for it. It's just not my style. But I just did a piece last October, beautiful play about older people that was not at all about disease and dementia. And it was about two women. It was woman-centered, emotional, based, relationship based, not old based. So it wasn't about age. It was about people. And the fact that there were two older women, it was a phenomenal play. Lindsay Bears is the last name of the author. I can't think of the first name, called Ripcord. It's an amazing play. And if any older people hearing this want to do a play, it's tremendous. And I'd do it again in a second. And you get to parachute in it, get to jump out of a plane.
Ms. Dusenberry, thank you so much for your time. This has been terrific.
Oh, Mike, thank you.
And last but not least, we're going to hear from Lisa Eichhorn. If you want to hear more of my discussion with Ms. Eichhorn, please check out the bonus interview that will be coming out at the same time as this episode. We spoke for, probably another hour talking about her roles on British television, talking about working with John Schlesinger, a whole lot of good stuff. Be sure to check that out, and I hope you enjoy this interview. How did you get the role for Cutter's Way?
I had done Yanks and I had finished the Europeans and I had gone back to England and then back to New York. I decided I'd been to a screening in Bournemouth of World War II veterans. That was the first time the film was shown. And it was in early June of 1979. I realized I wanted to be in America. I had done what I wanted to do. I had trained myself. I was starting in the movie business. I was doing plays. Had done television and a play with Elaine Stritch in between two movies. I wanted to be in America. So I was in New York. Paul Gurion and Yvonne Pastor asked to meet me, and I met them at the Carlisle. And I can remember what I was wearing. I wouldn't have given me the part. It looks like an English rose. I straight off the boat. I had white sandals on and I can remember I had a pink linen skirt and a pink and white voile blouse. It was all French, and walked into the room and they just looked at me and said, "We want you to do this movie." I think subsequent to that, when I was in LA for the opening of Yanks, when we were filming Cutter's Way, before we started filming, I still couldn't comprehend how they saw that I could be that character. It's like they had some kind of X-ray vision or something into me, that they saw something. So they asked me, and I said yes, because I had read the script and I wanted to do it.
You spend most of the movie inebriated. How do you act drunk but not too drunk? You just seem to hit that right level as far as just being a little bit out of it, but you still have your wits all about you.
Practice? No. I don't know. I think it partly comes from understanding where your body is in that experience. I was in my 27 or something like that. So I'd had alcohol before in my life. It's not like I had never been tipsy or had too much to drink at any time. And I think it's using that memory. And when I was at drama school, I went to a lot of theater, obviously. You want to see everything you can. You want to learn as much as you can. You watch movies, you go to plays, you learn from how your center of gravity changes when you have a certain amount of alcohol, I guess. And I will tell you, one day, Yvonne decided that he said, "What would it be like if you really had vodka?" That was not a good idea. I'd never drank vodka. We tried that for a take or two. I said, I would just like the water in the bottle, please, because this isn't working for me. I have great admiration for directors. Some of them ask, some of them are tyrants, some of them know what they want. Some of them, you show them what they want, and then they go, "Oh, that's what I want." He trusted me. There was a great trust between all of us, I felt. So I don't know how. It just was in me.
What is your method of going about finding a character, especially a character as complicated as Mo?
Part of how I found Mo was by being around John and Jeff. And we were three young actors. Jeff, of course, had the most experience of the three of us because he'd been acting so much longer than either John or myself. And John, indeed, had been acting probably longer than I. But we knew that being friends was paramount to the story, I think. That this idea that this was a threesome. I think I understood from the beginning her delusion, her disappointment in waiting and wanting so much for her husband to come back to be the person that he was, you know, that sort of holding out against all the evidence, you know. Loyalty is a very important characteristic to me, and I think she had that. I read recently that someone decided that Mo and Bone were always having an affair, and that was never our intention. My belief about her was that she was faithful to Cutter. She loved Cutter, and her spirit broke when he decided to go after Cord. She couldn't bear it. I don't know. It's funny. I remember reading something between Maggie Smith and Judi Dench, and I am a proud member of the Actors Studio and its fine traditions. But I also have a great respect for the British tradition because obviously I was trained over there. But I remember them reading in some interview or other, they were talking about the method. What's the method? You just get up and you say your lines or something. So I think probably just like my voice in those early days was caught between two places. Maybe sometimes my sensibility about acting was or is like that too. I believed in her, and so I put me in her. I think that the real answer is that she was inside of me. I didn't prepare. I mean, I knew my lines when I went to work. There was a chemistry between Jeff and John and me. I didn't have to do the kind of preparation, for instance, that I'd done for Marilyn Monroe when I was doing her on stage. I had to listen to her voice and her watch her walk. And I interviewed 6 or 7 people who had known her or worked with her. It was different. Mo, for good or ill, was already in there. I didn't seek out Vietnam vets to date or go on benders. I just let her come out. And I think that probably, you know, as young as I was in the business, even at that time, in terms of filmmaking, I'd already experienced certain things. So it wasn't that it was extraordinarily quick to get to where I got, but it wasn't a completely smooth ride once I was in it. So I think that I just used whatever experience I had up to the age of 27 or whatever I was, 28, to find her.
You're right. You're right there in the middle between Cutter and Bone and kind of being tossed about between these two men, but you were such a strong character.
I think she is a strong character. I think it would be easy to think that she was weak and that she stayed because she didn't have anywhere else to go. But I think she's very strong. It's painful waiting for Alex to wake up, but she's willing to wait because she loves him. And I don't think she's waiting because she's fatalistic or a depressive. I think she's strong. I think she tries to tell him that what he's doing is wrong. I think she sees the relationship of Bone with Cutter as something that they need but may not be great. She understands that Bone does come to their house because he has nowhere else to go. I think of her as strong.
What do you feel about that last scene of the film that you're in? I mean, that amazing moment when you wake up as Bone's leaving. I mean, you have to have some idea of what she ends up doing next.
I believe that she has hoped and hoped. Once again, she's hoped that he will stay. And he can't stay. It's not in his nature to stay. And I think when she opens her eyes, she knows that. I personally don't think that she commits suicide. I think she's stronger than that. It is not my feeling that Bone walking out on her, like Cutter says when he's mad at Bone after she's died, and that one night with him would send her for the matches. I don't think so. I don't think so. And actually, I think that the film, oddly, stands the test of time because of the levers of power and corporate power and what happens to people, even journalists who disappear in countries where heads of state don't want journalists to be telling stories. Not a conspiracy theorist myself. I'm not. But I think that people who are immensely influential and wealthy often can do and get away with things that mere mortals cannot.
You talked a little bit about the way that you and Yvonne Passer worked. How was your actual experience on the film itself? What was that experience like for you?
Oh, I loved it. We had a wonderful working relationship. And he, although he had lived in America for a long time, he was European. And I understood that. I think one of my favorite early films when I was just beginning my career was The Lace Maker. I loved the perspective of European films. I loved the storytelling. So we got along very well. Yeah, he did play a trick on me, though. He did play a trick on me. We had to shoot the love scene, the scene where Mo's in the backyard and then she comes in and realizes that Bone has been watching her, and then they end up in bed together, and then the scene when he leaves, right? And it was very long. It was twice too long. And so Yvonne wanted to have a script meeting, and get together over dinner and talk about the script. That's what he said. So I worked very hard. I love collaborating. I've done lots of new plays in my career. I've done several low budget movies. I enjoy the challenge. It's raining and it was supposed to be sunny or whatever, right? So I set to this task with great zeal and cut about, 50%. We needed it to be, 7 pages or something. I don't know. And he said we would meet Jeff would pick the kind of food, I would pick the restaurant. Well, I was living at the Chateau Marmont and Jeff picked Japanese. And so I said, okay, the Imperial Gardens. It's just below the Chateau Marmont on Sunset. So the evening we were to meet, I arrived at the Imperial Gardens for dinner and they didn't show up. They weren't there. And I waited for half an hour and nobody came. And then somebody took pity on me and said, are you waiting for someone? I said, yes, 2 gentlemen. They said, oh, they've been here. They're sitting down already. So they had already been imbibing quite a bit of sake and they were talking about the script, and we talked and we had dinner, and then Yvonne said, well, let's go back to yours to work on the script. It's very late by then. It's like 11 o'clock and they've both had a lot of sake, and we have like a 5:30, 6 o'clock call. I don't know, 6:30 call. I'm very conscious of wanting to do well. And so we go back up to my apartment, and suddenly I think I have to go to the loo. I go to the loo, I come back, and Yvonne is gone. And I said to Jeff, where's Yvonne? He said, oh, he left. I said, what do you mean he left? I thought you were going to work on the script. Anyway, it seems that Yvonne really wanted us to get to know each other better. But Jeff was really in his cups and spent some time in my bathroom, and then finally was able to gather himself at about, something like 3:30 or something in the morning. I said, I'm calling a cab. You are leaving. You are not staying here. We have to go to work tomorrow. So a cab picked him up, and he was I don't know how the kerfuffle happened. But anyway, the taxi cab drove Jeff to Santa Barbara, where he lives or was living. And by the time the taxi cab got to Santa Barbara, his ride to go to work, I was there to pick him up to bring him back to the set. And I was so agitated, I did not sleep a wink. And we got to the set the next morning, and I said, I'm like, well, where did you go? I thought we were going to work on the script. I worked on the script. And he said, calm down. It's okay. Well, Jeff and I were both a bit of a mess. And so we didn't do any shooting that morning. They did something else, and we worked in the afternoon. But Jose was a rogue. He was a bit of a rogue.
How was John Hurt to work with in that one?
We were never lovers. We were never intimate partners in life, but we loved each other. It's like we recognized something about each other. I don't know whether it was some childhood thing or, that feeling when you meet somebody and you look at them and you feel like you've known them or you've always known them, or I don't know, Jung talks about it, that thing where you can be in a room full of people and you look across the room and you'll see that one person that you can talk to or who is like you, and we were like that. We just got on. I saw him after Cutter's Way years later when he was doing Beaches and I was living in New York. I babysat his son for him. We just got on, and he was, I'm not saying he was always in character and he always had the prosthesis on or anything. No, that's not the case. But he often would, because he thought it was humorous, he would take to beating me with a cane. He'd like hit me with that cane. I just loved him. I just thought he was wonderful. It was an experience that was different from Yanks and the Europeans and Why Would I Lie, which were the 3 movies I did before Cutter's Way. They were my training ground for Cutter's Way. I understood. I was, the cliche, I was like a sponge on those early sets, trying to learn and understand everything I could. And I think that because of my experiences on those sets, and obviously John Schlesinger is quintessentially different from James Ivory as a director, and James Ivory is absolutely antithetical to Larry Pierce. So then I got to work with Yvonne. So I loved it. I felt I was coming to a moment for me, and that I was on my way. I felt that about the 3 of us, that we were in this sort of moment. I worked subsequently, even in smaller parts on films, and sometimes you hear actors, because they get away from themselves and they say, this movie is so great, it's going to get nominated. And you think, oh, please be serious. Stop talking. Just act. And we had no idea that Cutter's Way would be that kind of movie in a way, that it would have such a life, that it would be so well respected, so dear, so excellent in every way. We just were in it, truly in it. Oh, I can tell you another funny story about Cutter's Way. We were up in Santa Barbara and we were staying at the El Encanto Hotel, and we had bungalows, and we would meet in the main hotel part and look at dailies. And I had never done that. Schlesinger and nobody had done that. I mean, John Schlesinger showed me one daily one time, and it was very, very early on. I think it was like my first day of filming. It was a Christmas party, and every time the camera panned to me, I ducked my head and looked away. Every time. And he showed me all these takes, and I just ducked my head and looked away. He showed it to me, and he said, can you fix that? And I looked at him because I understood the gravity of the moment. And I said, I guess I better. Because if I didn't look at the camera, then forget it, Lisa, go home. So we're at dailies. It's a couple years later. We're having a drink. It's so wonderful. Everybody's happy. It looks great. We're looking at the opening, and then there's a scene between, maybe I think it's a scene that between the three of us in the luncheonette or the cafe where Cutter is interrogating Bone about what it was like, and before we go out to the parade, right? And we see that, and it's nice, and I don't know, and we go off. It's nighttime. We have to call the next morning, and I understand that the next night they're busy in I don't remember whose bungalow. I think it was Jeffrey's bungalow, the writers, and they're rewriting the ending because John says, if she dies, I have to die, because look at her on that screen. I can't live if she dies. That was not the original ending. Anyway, so I've loved theater work I've done. I played Marilyn Monroe in Manchester, one of my favorite theaters in the world, the Royal Exchange Theatre, in a play called Misfits. Yeah, I think I love the thing it is that I'm doing at the moment the best, because what's the point if you don't,
And what have you been up to lately?
I did a panel at the Reading Film Festival in Pennsylvania about how do you make a career? How do you keep a career? How do you withstand the ups and downs? That was a very interesting panel. As with everyone, I think that the pandemic, I moved back from England because I'd gone back over there in 2003. And because I had written some television, and I had wanted to see if I could get it produced by the BBC, because I was told by Paramount TV that they didn't do anthology television. There was a series of short stories by the same author. So I sensibly went back over to England for that. And then I stayed. And the last filming I did was in 2018. And then I came back to the United States and sort of took care of business with my family. My father and sister passed away, and then the pandemic. I may be one of the slower people coming out of the pandemic, but I'm just beginning to decide what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do. I'd love to act. I've been thinking about writing a book because I've been helping a friend edit a book. My first job at university was as a professional proofreader. So I've been helping edit a book, and I thought, well, maybe I could write a book. I don't know. I don't have an agent in the United States at the moment. So I'm sort of an open book waiting for her pages to be turned.
You seem like the kind of person that could do whatever you want to put your mind to, though, which is fantastic.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you for that. I have felt that I had more gifts than I knew I had when I started. I think the business in 40 years is very different from now, from what it was. I mean, the idea of having a publicist and a manager and an agent and people to take care of me when I had the sudden success that I had, it never would have crossed my mind. I was just a working actor. I was going to act. I was going to go from one part to the next, and that's what I was doing. Getting the opportunity to do some screenwriting on Defenders of Riga and doing some producing and directing some theater. I taught for a long time too. I taught at the School of Visual Arts in New York for a long time, and I taught at the Royal Academy. I taught filmmakers up at National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield. I taught animators at DreamWorks. I love teaching. I just love it, I just love all of it.
Miss Eichhorn, thank you so much for your time. This has been so nice talking with you.
You are so very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
right, we are back and we were talking about Cutter's Way, and we were just talking about that conspiracy pool table / wall that we had, the alcoholics pool table, where you just maybe like throw the ball around and it lands on the latest theory, and then you get focused on that and you have the big epiphany, and that's when you go, I've got Cord nailed. Oh, I've got everything down. And this is where the movie either falls apart or really comes together or does whatever it does, because the end of this movie is so strange. I know, Mike, that you read the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about the book ending of this? Because I think we get kind of to a similar place and then we change paths.
After Moe dies, it becomes this sort of this Easy Rider, Hope Crosby road movie to Missouri to confront Cord's people. And not a lot comes out of it. By the end of it, Alex is locked up in an mental institution. Bone gets confronted and beaten up by some of Wolf's guys who make the same sort of confession that George does in the film. Wolf is responsible for everything that I am, even if he was guilty. Why would I help you? They beat the crap out of him in a stable, so we get the horse imagery there again. Bone is he's heading back to it's not Santa Barbara, I forget where it is in the book. He's heading back home, and he's sitting at a red light, and the guys who beat him up pull a shotgun, and that's the end of the book. Last line of the book is he sees they show him the shotgun, and that's too neat. And they're absolutely, they have like 5 or 6 endings that they kicked around. One where everyone gets away and is happy. Would have loved to see the end of the Live and Die in L.A. But it's very unsatisfying, and the whole last 150 pages of the book is a slog. And it's not just internal; it's repetitive, and it feels like it's on the road for depressed veterans, and it just doesn't hold. It doesn't hold to the first half, so they were right to get rid of it. But then as you pointed out, then we get into some weird crap in the film that just, now we're in Cutter's reality. Cutter has manifested his own reality. It's the only way to explain where we are.
We talked about how Valerie disappears, and she doesn't really disappear in the screenplay. So looking at the screenplay that says final screenplay on it, and it's got Cutter and Bone across the front. I can't remember. I think it was like early August 79 was the date on it. And it had some pages. You could see where some revisions were made. But in that, Cutter and Bone take George's invite to this party that Cord's throwing, which is the same as in the movie. We don't really see George coming in and looking around and seeing that one of his guns is missing and like putting 2 and 2 together and seeing all this stuff. We also don't get Cutter telling Bone that Cord murdered George's father. And that's why he was an orphan, was because of his father being murdered by Cord. And I can't remember what happened to the mother. And it's just like, whoa. This is a bombshell. Like you talked about how we don't really get to know a lot of the George stuff until later on in the movie. And this is a major bombshell about George. We get Valerie returning and her basically trying to throw the 2 guys off of the case and like, oh yeah, no, I went back to the beginning and I talked to the guy who sold the killer the gas, and he drew what the guy's hat looked like, and it looks like Smokey the Bear's hat. And so she just like makes up all of these excuses why it can't be Cord, until they really confront her and say, why are you staying? I think it's Cutter is like, why are you staying at this really fancy hotel and you've got all these drinks over here? Who paid you off? And eventually she ends up confessing that, yes, she was paid off. They think that it's Cord, but then eventually it turns out to be George because, as we heard Arthur Rosenberg say, George was supposed to be the big villain, and like all the way up until the end. And it's all in that script. There is the whole thing of George being the one holding the gun and him being the one who had accidentally killed the sister. I couldn't believe it. And I don't know how it would play out if George suddenly became that, but as we're talking about this movie in this conversation, we're just like, oh yeah, George is right there and he's doing all these great things. In any other movie, I would probably have suspected George, but there's no way that I suspect him in this film.
That's a late 80s movie. That's third or fourth build is the killer, guys. And that's, I guess it would have worked to that degree, but what we have now is so much better. You know, I'm glad that that's where they landed. But it would have worked.
Yes, it would have worked, but it would have pulled the focus away from more interesting characters.
So that's why Valerie disappears, because they have to cut that scene. Otherwise, it just wouldn't make sense. So they chop that thing out. So yeah, she disappears a few scenes before that. I think when he shoots the stuffed animal, that might be the last time we see her. So we have to build on all this stuff of George and him having this gun, and they eventually it turns out this becomes a real soap opera real quick. It turns out very quickly, no, George, I didn't kill your father. I am your father, says Cord in a movie that comes out right around the time of Empire Strikes Back. I'm like, what? Where does this come from? And then they just kind of resolve it. Cutter and Bone go off and do their own thing. And one of the last lines of the screenplay is, oh yeah, they picked up George this morning. Oh yeah, I figured they would pick him up soon or something like that. And then Bone starts to go away. He's taking one of the yachts and he's just going to go out on the open sea. Cutter eventually jumps onto the boat. It disturbs what Bone is doing with the I don't want to say steering wheel, because I don't think that's what you call them in a boat, the tiller, sure. And they crash into another boat, but apparently not so bad that they can't move on, because the last line of the screenplay is Cutter yelling at the bigger boat, like, you crazy motherfucker, or something like that. And that's how the movie ends. I'm like, oh my God, this movie, the ending now, so much more bleak. And I love the way that it plays out. And I love when we finally get to hear Cord's voice, because Cord is played by Stephen Elliott, who really I only remember as being the chief in Beverly Hills Cop. And when Axel Foley makes fun of his voice and all that, because he's got this great stentorian voice. And so when he starts to talk to Cutter and Bone at the end of this film, wow, I love it. I love hearing him do this. And then, of course, I love the question,
what if it were?
What if he was the guy that killed this girl? He just doesn't give a shit.
He's finally forced to act. He's finally free of his inertia, and he does the one thing he shouldn't do. As Maitland points out, there's no evidence. There's no assumption of guilt, and you guys broke in. So the only way he can get away with it is the gun is still in Alex's hand. So he's still weaseling out of it in that regard.
This crazy person just got this delusion about you and had to come and murder him. And, you know, I think he really wanted Jodie Foster to pay attention to him or something, but I don't know what this Cutter guy's story is. I just happen to wander in here, folks. Yeah, I can see Bone just at the police station the next day, just walking out. Yep. No big deal.
Only in there because they ran out of those little corn cob thingies I like so much. It's the whole reason I was in there in the first place. Sorry.
The first time this played out for me, I couldn't believe it what I had seen. And I had to go back and rewind it and watch it a few times just to be like, did this end the way that I thought that it ended? And yeah, sure enough, this ending doesn't change. And it sure is indelible. Just that gun ringing out and the cut to black. You don't know what happens. But the way that Bone is, he could have missed him at that distance.
That's what makes the jumping onto the yacht scene in the original script just hilarious to me, because the ending you get feels like the only ending you could get. Even with Alex succumbing to his wounds going through the glass, I can't see anything else but this inevitable death wish all the way through. So them getting away with it, yeah, that's To Live and Die in L.A., where William Peterson survives the shotgun to the face, and they all live happily ever after in Alaska, you know. But I would kill to see that scene. I really wish they had shot it, because it just sounds delightful.
Just two best friends going off into the sunset, But one thing, we were saying a lot in the earlier part of this discussion, we kept saying that this was a 70s movie that was released in the 80s. And I completely agree with that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we don't talk about this movie that much. You can hear in the interview some of the things that had to happen after it was released, how, Maitland sees it as Cutter and Bone. The rest of the world sees it as Cutter's Way because that's the retitled name that they put out, had a whole new advertising campaign, a different branch of United Artists, not putting anything behind this movie. So it just kind of fizzles, but I don't think it's just all of their fault. I don't think people wanted to see this. We talked about The Thing a few years ago, and what comes before The Thing is E.T., and people want to see the cute, fluffy alien. They want, that experience. They don't want The Thing. I think in 1981, we were looking at that City on the Hill already with Reagan, and attitudes are starting to shift. I don't think people want this kind of throwback to more of a Winter's Kill type of conspiracy movie to anything that Pakula is doing. I don't think they want that at this time. I think they want more light and fluffy fare. They want Jeff Bridges to be the hero. They want John Hurd to be the fun dad. They don't want this type of entertainment.
You're probably right. They want Raiders of the Lost Ark right now and Close Encounters, and they want to be able to trust the government again because that's where the money is. And put all this really ugliness behind us. So thank you for your service. Please go and rant and rave if you must over there.
We're not going to put you in a mental facility because don't worry, the president's going to cut all the funding for that.
All of this having been said, I actually love this ending, even though it's crazy. It really is crazy. Once you get to that party, things just even the way he gets into that party makes no sense at all. It's like that's like a teenager hopping over a hedge to get into a neighbor's yard or something, when this is a hugely expensive party filled with people who have security, people who their party doesn't get crashed that way. But yeah, he crashes it anyway. And just everything about it is lunatic. The grabbing that woman for the smooch is ridiculous. I mean, I'm stammering with how preposterous a lot of these things are, even though you absolutely can, and I absolutely do go with them. But then the finale of basically having two people kill him because it's a live hand on a dead hand and a gun, and then it all goes to black. I think you kind of feel like, did the print just burn up in the projector? And this is where it has to end. It burned up when they were screening the final cut negative, okay? And the end of it just burned up. And now this is what we had to make do with to bring this movie to a conclusion. And maybe people will just go with it because there has been a kind of crazy underlying it throughout.
Well, the student in me goes, well, don't you see? Now they're the same guy. He said he was Alexander Richards. Then he said he was Richard Alexander. Now they're the same person. And that would make me also want to throw myself out of class. So I'm glad that I did that here.
When this movie was called Cutter and Bone, that's basically them at the end of this whole adventure that they have. And yeah, it's a wild ride. But to your point, Maitland, I can't think of anything else. This feels like the way it should have ended. I think that this was one time where making that snap decision really helped out the film because, yeah, I don't want to see them riding off into the sunset. I don't want to see George getting his father revealed. No, I'm your father. Like, I don't need any of that stuff. I think this really hits. I mean, yes, we lose that last scene with Valerie, but, I think we're okay with her just kind of disappearing because really Mo disappears and then she disappears, or it might even be vice versa. And just by the end of it, here we are, just Cutter and Bone. No chicks allowed.
It is the perfect ending, and yet it is perfect in such a twisted way that you really feel as though you got pulled into the insanity of everybody's motivations and darkness and increasing detachment from the normal life of this movie, even, let alone normal life. Forget normal people's lives. But what's been passing for normal life in Cutter and Bone just comes to this absolute lunacy. And And I think that the place where it really starts is when the sister is reading that profile in the magazine. And it talks about, him saying, oh, I like to pick up hitchhikers and talk to them and hear what young people are thinking. That's ridiculous. Everything about that scene is ridiculous. But at that point, the movie has reached this point where, no, okay, that's how the gas can part comes into it, Oh, okay, now we've got that, and that makes sense, and it's bringing us to this ending. And again, that's a very 70s thing. There was just that chaos that was in the air all the time that allowed you to believe preposterous things, including horrifying things that you had to believe because they were real. So I think it adds to the movie that way.
Yeah, when I was listening to one of the commentaries, they were comparing it a lot to Chinatown, and I don't think it's just because it was another Eastern European director making a statement about America. There was that, but there was also just the older people in this community have done horrible things, and we are living with the consequences. So, Cord being the old money, possibly killing George's father, all of this kind of stuff, and then Noah Cross out there with his whole twisted thing. It's like the town's elders, the ones who get to ride the big white horse in the Founders Day parade, they're the ones you really need to watch out for, and they're the ones that are fucking us. I thought the commentary on the film was really well done. There's actually 2 commentary tracks, and I think all of that plus more is getting ported over to this new Fun City Editions. And I feel bad that we're recording this the day that disc is available, because I really wanted to see what was on there, because there's already a whole wealth of extra features out there for this. And I think they've done even more. And I thought I read that they had deleted scenes. So to your point, I wish they had filmed the whole George revelation. That would have been pretty cool, but it doesn't sound like that ever got captured.
The yacht chase. So they have to write that in there and not shoot a yacht chase, man.
There's a lot of connective tissue to this movie that definitely was cut. Reading that script, you get to see a lot of the beginnings of scenes, endings of scenes, where they would just take the middle of the scene when they were doing the editing of it. So you're missing a lot of connective tissue, but I think it works because this movie is so cuckoo. You don't want all of the tissue to tie it together. You want so many of these loose ends, and just the scenes kind of collide together rather than flowing together.
Yeah, context is for other movies.
And here you're in Cutter's world, and we're all just trying to figure it out.
It is a fever dream. And fever dreams actually do feel kind of great at the same time that they are the product of that insane fever. You wake up and you want to remember them so badly because they were so astonishing. There's the fever dream for you on the screen.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
Speaking. I'm talking from the bedroom of Norma Desmond. Don't bother with a rewrite, man. Take this direct. Ready? As day breaks over the murder house.
Yes, you'll read the big black headlines about Norma Desmond and this Hollywood scandal. But you'll never read the true story about the rest of us who were part of it. Me, for instance, Joe Gillis, a promising young writer from Dayton, Ohio. And Betty, that nice kid I met at a Hollywood party, who knew nothing about me, but knew what she wanted. Don't you love Artie?
Of course I love him. I always will. I'm just not in love with him anymore.
What happened?
You did?
Well, we should have lived happily ever after, like they do in the movies. But this was different, because this is a Hollywood story about the people who make the movies. The little ones that you never hear of, like Betty and me. The great ones like Cecil B. DeMille. All those who knew Norma Desmond, a strange woman who left her mark on all of us who crossed her path.
Has it ever occurred to you that I may have a life of my own, that there
There may be some girl that I'm crazy about.
Who? Some car hop or a dress extra?
What I'm trying to say is that I'm all wrong for you. You want a Valentino, somebody with polo ponies, a big shot.
What you're trying to say is you don't want me to love you. Say it. Say it.
Gloria Swanson, one of the great personalities of this generation in a role that comes to an actress once in a lifetime. Rising to the heights, William Holden creates a startling portrayal. And a new star is born in Sunset Boulevard, Miss Nancy Olson.
Joe? Where are you? What's this all about?
Why don't you come out and see for yourself? The address is 10,086 Sunset Boulevard.
Yes, come out to see for yourself the film that reaches a new milestone of dramatic daring. The film that every critic says is a giant among motion pictures.
That's right, we'll be back next week with our final film of Noirvember, Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Mike and Maitland. So, Maitland, what is the latest with you, ma'am?
The latest with me is that I have created a Substack newsletter, which is designed to showcase my interest in vintage gay adult novels, and specifically genre novels, thrillers, horror, mysteries. And I would love you to go visit it at vintagegaybooks.substack.com. There's lots of free material up there that you can read. And if you're really enthralled, it would be great if you subscribed, because there are new essays going up every 2 weeks.
And Mr. Watt, what is going on with you, sir?
We at Happy Cloud Pictures just re-released Amy Lynn Best's directorial meta film splatter movie, the director Blu-ray, and it actually looks really nice for having been shot on DV so long ago. It's a lot of fun. It's very bloody, and our latest issue of Exploitation Nation number 13 is on sale now, and we're working on 14 now. Where 14 will be a little tribute to William Richard, and who passed. His memorial was on the 16th. And that's it for us. See us at happycloudpictures.net.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on, like The Shabby Detective, a Columbo podcast, Dreams for Sale, a Twilight Zone 85 podcast, The Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller, Rankin on Bass, all that stuff. It's available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Don't ever orgy with a pet monkey. The little fuckers bite.